The marble floor was cold against Madeline Cross's designer dress as she lay there, stunned, her $800 heels scattered across the restaurant like broken promises. Above her stood Ethan Brooks, the waiter she'd just kicked, the single father she'd humiliated, the nobody who'd just proven he was anything but. The room held its breath. Phones recorded everything. And in that electric silence, power shifted hands without a single punch thrown. But let me take you back to where this all began, because what happened next will blow your mind. Stick with me until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The brass doors of Lumiere swung open at exactly 5:47 p.m., and with them came the kind of cold that has nothing to do with temperature. Ethan Brooks felt it immediately, that shift in air pressure that happens when someone important enters a room and expects the world to rearrange itself accordingly. He was polishing water glasses behind the bar when she walked in, this woman whose presence demanded attention like a fire alarm. Madeline Cross. He didn't know her name yet, but he recognized the type. Tailored power suit that probably cost more than his car, heels that clicked against marble like a countdown, and that particular way of scanning a room as if taking inventory of everything she owned, which, in her mind, likely included the people. Ethan. Marco, the floor manager, appeared at his elbow, voice tight with the special kind of stress reserved for VIP service. Table 7, the Cross party. She's early, she's alone until her guests arrive, and she's... He paused, searching for diplomatic phrasing. Particular. Ethan nodded, setting down the glass with the careful precision that defined everything he did. Particular. That was restaurant code for difficult, demanding, or downright cruel, wrapped in the thin veneer of professionalism that kept servers employed and bills paid. I've got it, Ethan said quietly, already reaching for the leather-bound menu, already shifting into that mental space where nothing personal could touch him. It was a skill he'd perfected over 3 years of serving people who looked through him like he was made of glass. Table 7 sat in the center of the main dining room, the power position, visible from every angle, under the crystal chandelier that threw fractured light across white tablecloths like scattered diamonds. Madeline Cross had already seated herself, phone in one hand, the other drumming an impatient rhythm against the table edge. Ethan approached with the smooth, unhurried pace of someone who understood that in places like Lumiere, rushing suggested desperation, and desperation suggested weakness. Good evening, ma'am. Welcome to Lumiere. My name is Ethan, and I'll be taking care of you this evening. She didn't look up. Her fingers continued their dance across her phone screen, manicured nails clicking a sharp counterpoint to his greeting. 10 seconds passed. 15. The silence stretched into rudeness, intentional and pointed. Can I start you with something to drink while you wait for your party? Pellegrino, room temperature, lemon, not lime, and make sure the glass is actually clean this time. Her eyes flicked up for half a second, just long enough to assess and dismiss him in a single glance. Your staff has a habit of leaving lipstick marks. Of course, I'll bring that right away. As Ethan turned toward the bar, he caught his reflection in one of the restaurant's many mirrors. A tall, lean man in his early 30s, dark hair pulled back neatly, white shirt pressed within an inch of its life, expression carefully neutral. He looked exactly like what he was supposed to be. Invisible, efficient, interchangeable with any other server in any other high-end restaurant. No one looking at him would guess what he'd been before, what he'd trained for, what he'd walked away from when Lily was born and her mother died and the world suddenly became about something bigger than himself. No one looking at him would see the scars hidden under his sleeves, or the discipline that kept his hands steady, even when his mind wandered to his daughter, currently at the neighbor's apartment doing homework, waiting for him to come home smelling like expensive food they'd never taste. Pellegrino, room temp, lemon, he told James, the bartender, who was already reaching for the green bottle. Cross? James asked, and when Ethan nodded, he grimaced. Heard about her. Investment banker. Made her fortune shorting companies into bankruptcy. Real sweetheart. They all are, Ethan said without inflection, taking the glass and checking it against the light for any imperfection that might trigger another complaint. Spotless. He added the lemon wedge and headed back. The restaurant was filling now, that 6 o'clock rush when reservations stacked like dominoes, and the kitchen began its nightly orchestration of controlled chaos. Ethan wove through the maze of tables with the spatial awareness that came from years of carrying hot plates through tight spaces, aware of every elbow, every pulled-out chair, every server moving in the opposite direction. He set the water down in front of Madeline Cross with quiet precision, the glass meeting the table without a sound. "Your Pellegrino, ma'am. Are you expecting your guests soon, or would you like to hear about our specials while you wait?" This time she did look up, and her eyes were the color of winter ice. Not the pretty kind that sparkles in sunlight, but the dangerous kind that hides how thin it is until you're already falling through. "What I would like," she said slowly, as if speaking to someone who might not understand English, "is for you to do your job without requiring constant instruction. I ordered water. You brought water. This doesn't necessitate conversation." Behind them, Ethan sensed rather than saw other diners glancing over, attracted by the sharp edge in her voice. This was how it started in places like this, a small moment of casual cruelty that could either dissipate or escalate depending on how the target responded. "Understood. I'll check back when your guests arrive." "You'll check back when I signal you," Madeline corrected. "I don't need a waiter hovering like a puppy hoping for scraps." Ethan nodded once, keeping his face still, and stepped back to his position near the bar where he could observe his tables without being intrusive. His jaw ached from clenching, a physical reminder to relax, to breathe, to remember this was temporary. 4 more hours. Then he could go home to Lily, help her with her math homework, read her a chapter of whatever book they were on, currently the Chronicles of Narnia, and pretend for a little while that they weren't one missed shift away from eviction. "You good?" Marco appeared again, this time with that particular concern that suggested he'd witnessed the interaction. "Fine." She's always like this. Last month she made Sarah cry. Before that she sent back 3 steaks claiming they weren't cooked right. Chefs swore they were perfect. "I can handle it," Ethan said, because what else was there to say? He couldn't afford to request a table transfer, couldn't afford to show weakness, couldn't afford anything except absolute professionalism until his shift ended and he could collapse in his car in the parking lot like he sometimes did, forehead against the steering wheel, counting down from 10 until the day released its grip on his chest. At 6:23, Madeline's guests arrived, 3 men in suits that probably cost more than Ethan's yearly salary, all wearing the same expression of practiced confidence that came from never having to question whether they belonged somewhere. Ethan watched them settle into their seats, watched the dynamic shift as Madeline transformed from ice queen into charming hostess, all smiles and laughter that never quite reached her eyes. He gave them 5 minutes to get comfortable before approaching. "Good evening, gentlemen. Can I start you with some drinks?" The ordering process was smooth enough. 2 scotches, a martini, another Pellegrino for Madeline. But as Ethan turned to leave, her voice cut through the air like a blade. "Wait." He turned back. "Yes, ma'am?" "Your name tag is crooked." Ethan glanced down. The small brass tag that read Ethan sat perfectly straight on his shirt pocket. "I apologize. I'll adjust it." "See that you do. Presentation matters in an establishment like this." She smiled at her guests, a look that said, "Can you believe the help these days?" You'd think basic grooming would be standard. One of the men, late 50s, silver hair, uncomfortable eyes, cleared his throat. "Madeline, I'm sure your server is perfectly capable of maintaining professional standards," she said smoothly, cutting him off. "Aren't you, Ethan?" There it was. His name, weaponized. Used not as an acknowledgement of his humanity, but as a tool to establish hierarchy, to remind him and everyone within earshot exactly where he stood in her world. "Absolutely, ma'am. I'll get those drinks right away." In the brief walk back to the bar, Ethan performed the mental exercise his therapist had taught him, back when he could afford therapy. Identify the feeling, acknowledge it, let it pass. Anger, humiliation, frustration, each one noted and released like catching and freeing butterflies. By the time he reached James, his expression was calm again, even if his heart rate wasn't. 2 Macallan 18s, 1 Hendricks Martini, extra dry, and another Pellegrino, he recited. James started pouring, then paused. "Your name tag really crooked?" "No." "Didn't think so." He slid the glasses across the bar. "You know, you could—" "I can't," Ethan said simply, and James dropped it because they both knew the score. This wasn't about what was fair or right. This was about paying rent, keeping food on the table, making sure Lily had her medication refilled when her asthma flared up. This was about survival. The drinks delivered, Ethan took their dinner orders, sea bass for Madeline, various steaks for the men, and transmitted them to the kitchen where Chef Raymond ruled with the benevolent tyranny of someone who'd earned 3 Michelin stars and never let anyone forget it. For the next 40 minutes, Ethan performed his job with mechanical precision. He brought bread, refilled water, delivered meals with the proper flourish. And through it all, Madeline found fault. The bread was too cold. The water had ice when she'd specifically said no ice. She hadn't. His timing was off. His posture suggested disrespect. His efficiency suggested rushing them. Each criticism was delivered with a smile, always in front of her guests, always loud enough for nearby tables to hear. It was a performance, Ethan realized. She was establishing dominance, showing these men, potential investors probably, that she was someone who commanded absolute control over her environment, right down to the staff. By 7:30, other servers were shooting him sympathetic looks. Marco had checked in twice. Even some of the regular diners, people who came to Lumiere weekly and knew the staff by name, were watching with expressions ranging from pity to secondhand embarrassment. But Ethan continued, because this was the deal he'd made with himself 3 years ago when he'd hung up his old life like a coat he no longer fit into. He would do whatever it took, endure whatever he had to endure, to give Lily the stable, safe childhood she deserved. If that meant swallowing his pride nightly, then pride was a luxury he couldn't afford. At 8:15, as Ethan was clearing their dinner plates, Madeline's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and something shifted in her expression. A tightness around her eyes, a tension in her shoulders. Whatever the message said, it had disturbed her carefully maintained composure. "Is everything all right, ma'am?" one of her guests asked. "Fine," she said crisply, setting the phone down with more force than necessary. "Just some people who don't understand the meaning of professionalism." Her eyes landed on Ethan, who was stacking plates with quiet efficiency, and something in her gaze crystallized into focus. She'd had a bad moment, received bad news, and now she needed somewhere to direct the resulting emotion. And there he stood, convenient and powerless. "You," she said. Ethan looked up. "Yes, ma'am?" "How long have you worked here?" The question seemed innocent, but Ethan felt the trap in it like a wire across a dark path. 3 years. 3 years, and in 3 years, has no one taught you proper service etiquette? I apologize if there's been... Your hands, she interrupted, her voice rising just enough to carry to the neighboring tables. Look at your hands. Ethan glanced down at his hands, balanced on the stack of plates he was holding. They were clean, nails trimmed, exactly as they should be. "Ma'am, I'm not sure..." "Those scars." She pointed with one perfectly manicured finger. Visible scarring on a server's hands in a restaurant of this caliber is unacceptable. It's unsightly. It's unprofessional. Frankly, it's disgusting. The restaurant didn't go quiet. There was still the ambient noise of cutlery and conversation, but in the immediate vicinity, people had stopped talking. Ethan felt the weight of their attention like physical pressure. The scars she referenced were old, faded silver lines across his knuckles and the backs of his hands. Training scars, combat scars. The kind of marks you earned learning to break boards, then bricks, then defending yourself and others in situations most people only saw in movies. He'd accumulated them over 15 years in a discipline that demanded everything and gave back strength, focus, and a dangerous kind of confidence. But standing here, holding dirty plates while a woman in a $3,000 suit sneered at the evidence of his past, those scars felt like shame. I apologize if they're distracting, Ethan said quietly, the words tasting like ash. Would you like me to have another server complete your service? What I would like, Madeline said, leaning back in her chair with the satisfied air of someone who'd found the perfect pressure point, is for this establishment to maintain standards. What kind of person ends up with hands like that anyway? Bar fights? Prison? Madeline, the silver-haired man tried again, clearly uncomfortable. This seems what, Richard? I'm simply pointing out that when I pay $400 for a meal, I expect a certain level of refinement. not to be served by someone who looks like they've been in street brawls. Ethan felt something shift inside him. Not anger exactly, but a kind of cold clarity. This wasn't about his hands or his service or anything he'd actually done wrong. This was about power, pure and simple. She was upset about something in her life, and he was the easiest target for her to reassert control. He could walk away, should walk away. Take the plates to the kitchen, inform Marco he needed to be removed from the table. Let someone else finish the shift. It would mean less tip money, would mean explaining to his manager why he couldn't handle a difficult customer, would mean another mark against him in a job where 3 marks meant unemployment. But looking at Madeline Cross, seeing the cold satisfaction in her eyes as she waited for him to bow lower, to apologize more profusely, to accept her assessment of his worth, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in years, the quiet, centered calm that came before a fight. Not a physical fight. He would never. But a different kind of confrontation, one where he simply refused to participate in his own humiliation. "They're for martial arts training," he said, his voice level and clear. 15 years of Muay Thai and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. The scarring is from conditioning work, repeated impact training that strengthens bones and tissue. It's common among serious practitioners. The table went silent. Madeline's eyes narrowed. "I apologize if they offend you," Ethan continued, "but they're a part of who I am, and I'm not ashamed of them. Now, can I interest anyone in dessert, or would you prefer your check?" For 3 seconds, maybe 4, nobody moved. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see which way this would break. Then Madeline stood up. She didn't stand like someone preparing to leave. She stood like someone preparing for battle, her chair scraping back against marble with a sound like a sword being drawn. "How dare you?" she said, her voice low and dangerous. "How dare you speak to me like that?" "I spoke respectfully. You spoke like someone who's forgotten his place." She took a step closer, invading the space between server and guest that was supposed to remain inviolate. "Do you know who I am?" "Madeline Cross, investment banker. I was briefed when you made your reservation. Then you know that one phone call from me could end this restaurant's financing. One word from me could close these doors permanently." Another step. They were now less than 2 feet apart, her face tilted up toward his, eyes blazing with the kind of rage that came from someone unaccustomed to anything less than immediate compliance. "And you want to get smart with me over your disgusting hands?" Ethan was aware of multiple things simultaneously. The phones coming out at nearby tables, recording this interaction for social media. Marco frozen near the kitchen door, clearly trying to decide whether to intervene. The 3 businessmen at Madeline's table looking various shades of uncomfortable, but saying nothing, doing nothing, protecting their own interests by staying silent. And he was aware of his daughter, Lily, age 7, who would be getting ready for bed soon in their tiny apartment, who trusted him to come home every night, who believed her daddy was strong and good and would always keep them safe. "Ma'am," Ethan said quietly, "I'm going to step back now, and I'm going to get my manager. I think that's best for everyone." "What's best," Madeline hissed, "is for you to get on your knees and apologize, right here, right now, in front of everyone. Maybe then I'll consider not having you fired and blacklisted from every decent restaurant in this city." The room had gone quiet now, really quiet, conversation dying out in concentric circles, as more people became aware of the confrontation unfolding in the center of the dining room. Ethan looked at this woman, this person who'd probably never struggled for anything in her life, who'd never had to choose between paying for medicine or electricity, who'd never held a sick child and felt the terror of not knowing if you could afford the doctor, and he felt something close to pity. "No," he said simply. Madeline blinked, as if the word didn't compute. "What did you just say?" "I said no. I'm not getting on my knees. I'm not apologizing for explaining my scars when you demanded an explanation. And I'm not going to pretend that your behavior tonight has been anything other than deliberately cruel." He spoke calmly, without heat, just stating facts. "I'm sorry you're having a bad day. I'm sorry something in your life has made you feel like you need to tear someone else down to feel powerful, but I'm done participating in it." He turned toward the kitchen, toward Marco, toward safety and professional distance. He never saw her hand coming. The slap caught him across the left cheek, hard enough that his head snapped to the side, hard enough that his vision sparked white at the edges. The sound of it, sharp, meaty, unmistakable, echoed through the silent restaurant like a gunshot. Ethan froze. Every instinct, every trained response, every muscle memory from 15 years of fighting screamed at him to react, to move, to defend himself. His body knew what to do. His hands knew how to check a strike, how to control an opponent, how to end a threat in under 3 seconds. But his mind knew something his body didn't. That fighting back, even in self-defense, would be the end of everything. A server striking a wealthy guest? It didn't matter who'd started it. It didn't matter what the phones were recording. In the courtroom of public opinion, in the actual courtroom that would follow, he would lose. He would lose his job, lose his ability to work in this industry, lose custody of Lily when the lawyers started arguing about his violent response and dangerous past. So Ethan stood absolutely still, plates still balanced in his hands, cheek burning, and did nothing. Madeline seemed to realize what she'd done. Not the wrongness of it, but the exposure of it. Her eyes darted to the phones, to the witnesses, to her business associates who were now staring at her with expressions of shock and disgust. She started, voice shrill. He was threatening me. You all saw... We saw you slap a waiter who was trying to leave, Richard said quietly, already standing, already reaching for his coat. I'm done here, Madeline. We're all done here. The other men rose with him, none of them meeting her eyes, already distancing themselves from the scene, from her, from the liability she'd just become. Richard, wait. But they were leaving, weaving through tables toward the exit, and Madeline was left standing alone in the center of the restaurant, exposed under the chandelier's unforgiving light, with a waiter she'd just assaulted still standing there, still calm, still holding plates. Marco finally unfroze, rushing over with his phone already to his ear, probably calling the owner. Other staff members were converging, creating a buffer. And Madeline, realizing she'd lost her audience, her power, her control, did what cornered predators often do. She attacked again. It wasn't calculated this time. It was pure rage, pure humiliation turned outward. She lunged at Ethan with hands extended like claws, aiming for his face, his eyes, anything she could damage. And this time, instinct won. Ethan moved. Not to strike, not to hurt, but to protect himself with the ingrained efficiency of someone who'd spent thousands of hours training for exactly this kind of situation. He shifted his weight, pivoted, let her momentum carry her past him while he simply wasn't there anymore. The plates he'd been holding crashed to the floor, a sound like breaking glass and splintering ceramic that somehow seemed quieter than it should have been against the backdrop of gasps and shocked exclamations. Madeline stumbled, off balance, reaching for purchase and finding nothing but air. Her expensive heels, beautiful but impractical, caught on the marble floor, betrayed her, sent her sprawling forward with a cry that was equal parts rage and surprise. She hit the ground hard, designer dress splayed around her, phone skittering across the floor, one shoe coming off entirely. And Ethan stood above her, hands empty now, breathing steady, having not struck a single blow. The silence that followed was absolute. Madeline pushed herself up on her elbows, hair disheveled, makeup smudged, looking for the first time that evening like something other than perfectly composed. Her eyes found Ethan's, and in them he saw something she probably hadn't felt in years. Genuine fear. Because she'd just attacked someone, and that someone had moved like water, like smoke, like someone who understood violence at a level she couldn't comprehend, and he'd chosen not to hurt her. That choice, somehow, was more terrifying than if he'd fought back. Security, Marco was saying into his phone. Yes, immediately, we have a situation. People were standing now, some recording, some just watching, some moving toward the exit because they'd paid for dinner and entertainment, but not this kind of scene. The kitchen door swung open and Chef Raymond appeared, took in the situation with one sweeping glance and nodded at Ethan, a gesture that somehow conveyed understanding, support, and sympathy all at once. Ethan looked down at Madeline Cross, this woman who'd set out to destroy his evening, his pride, possibly his entire livelihood, and felt nothing but exhaustion. I need to clock out, he said to Marco, his voice carrying in the silence. Is that all right? Marco nodded, still on the phone. Take tomorrow off too, paid. We'll handle this. Ethan untied his apron with steady hands, folded it once, twice, set it on the nearest empty table with the kind of care he'd given everything that evening. Then he walked toward the employee exit, his footsteps echoing against marble, aware of every eye on him, but looking at none of them. Behind him, he heard Madeline starting to speak, her voice rising. "He attacked me. You all saw. He's some kind of—" But he was already pushing through the door, already in the back corridor where the beautiful veneer of lumiere gave way to concrete and fluorescent lights, already shedding the mask of the quiet waiter and feeling, for the first time in hours, like himself. His hands were shaking now, adrenaline catching up. He leaned against the wall, counted to 10, then 20, waiting for his heart rate to settle. A phone call to Mrs. Chen, his neighbor, to let her know he'd be home soon. A brief conversation with the owner, Mr. Castellano, who'd arrived with security and wanted his statement, his side, his truth. Security footage pulled, witness statements gathered, the efficient machinery of liability management spinning into action. Through it all, Ethan remained calm, remained factual, remained professional. Yes, she'd slapped him. No, he hadn't struck back. Yes, she'd attacked again. No, he'd only evaded. Yes, he had martial arts training. No, he'd never used it aggressively. 2 hours later, long after Madeline Cross had been escorted from the building still threatening lawsuits and ruin, Ethan finally walked to his car. A 15-year-old Honda with a cracked windshield and 190,000 miles on the odometer. He sat in the driver's seat, forehead against the steering wheel, and allowed himself 10 seconds of complete stillness. 10 seconds where he wasn't a waiter, wasn't a father, wasn't anything except a man who was so very tired. Then he started the engine, pulled out of the parking lot, and drove home to his daughter, who was still awake, still waiting, still believing that her daddy was strong and good and would always keep them safe. And as Ethan parked outside their apartment building, as he climbed the stairs to their third-floor unit, as he opened the door to find Lily curled up on the couch with Mrs. Chen, homework spread around her, eyes lighting up when she saw him, Ethan realized something that felt simultaneously like relief and terror. His old life, the one he'd carefully buried for 3 years, had just cracked its way back to the surface. And there was no putting it back. The apartment smelled like Mrs. Chen's jasmine tea and Lily's strawberry shampoo, familiar scents that usually signaled home and safety. But tonight they felt fragile, like everything else in Ethan's carefully constructed world. "Daddy!" Lily launched herself from the couch before he'd fully closed the door, 7 years old and all momentum, colliding with his legs hard enough that he had to brace himself. Her arms wrapped around his waist with the fierce certainty of a child who hadn't yet learned that sometimes the people you love don't come home at all. Ethan's hands found her hair automatically, smoothing the dark curls that were so like her mother's, it sometimes hurt to look at them. "Hey, little bug, you're supposed to be asleep." Mrs. Chen let me wait up. We were doing fractions. She pulled back, looking up at him with eyes that were his own, dark brown, serious, seeing too much. "Your face is red." His hand moved to his left cheek before he could stop it, fingers finding the heat still radiating from where Madeline's palm had connected. In the bathroom mirror at the restaurant, he'd seen the outline of her hand printed on his skin like evidence, like shame made visible. "It's nothing, just a long shift." Mrs. Chen appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish tag. She was 73, widowed, sharp as broken glass despite what her age might suggest. Her eyes went immediately to his face, then to his hands, reading the story his body told even when his mouth stayed quiet. "Lily, sweet girl, why don't you get your pajamas on? Your daddy needs to talk to me about boring adult things." "But go on, I'll come tuck you in." Ethan gave her a gentle push toward her bedroom, waited until the door closed before he let his shoulders drop, let the weight of the evening settle onto him like a wet coat. Mrs. Chen crossed her arms. "What happened?" A guest got upset. "Ethan." The way she said his name, patient but immovable, the tone of someone who'd raised 4 children and buried a husband and didn't have time for half-truths, broke through his remaining defenses. "She slapped me, in front of the whole restaurant, then tried to attack me again when I wouldn't apologize for existing." The words came out flat, drained of emotion. "I moved out of the way, and she fell. Security footage caught everything. My manager says I'm clear, but you're terrified," Mrs. Chen finished quietly. Ethan nodded, not trusting his voice, because that was the truth underneath everything else. Not anger at Madeline, not even humiliation at being struck in public, just pure animal terror that this incident would somehow spiral, would reach the family court judge who'd granted him custody, would give Lily's maternal grandparents the ammunition they'd been looking for to take her away. They'd never approved of him, the fighter, the man with no college degree, the one who'd gotten their daughter pregnant and then had the audacity to survive her when a drunk driver ran a red light 3 weeks after Lily was born. For 3 years, they'd been circling like sharks, waiting for him to fail, to prove their assessment correct. And now he'd been involved in an altercation with a wealthy woman who probably had lawyers on speed dial. "Listen to me." Mrs. Chen's hand found his shoulder, grip surprisingly strong. "You did nothing wrong. You hear me? Nothing. Doesn't matter what I did, matters what it looks like. Then we make sure it looks like the truth, which is that you were assaulted and defended yourself without raising a hand to her. That's not a crime, Ethan. That's restraint." He wanted to believe her, wanted to accept the simple arithmetic of right and wrong, innocent and guilty. But he'd been navigating the world long enough to know that math didn't always work the same way for everyone. "I should check on Lily," he said, moving toward her bedroom before Mrs. Chen could push deeper, could ask the questions that would unravel him completely. Lily's room was barely bigger than a closet, just enough space for a twin bed, a small dresser, and the bookshelf Ethan had built from scrap lumber. Posters covered the walls, animals, planets, a diagram of the human skeletal system that she'd been fascinated by since her last doctor's visit. She was already in her pajamas, sitting cross-legged on her bed with her notebook open. "What are you working on?" Ethan asked, settling onto the edge of her mattress. "Math. Mrs. Chen said if I get all the problems right, she'll teach me about percentages next." Lily's pencil moved across the paper with careful precision. "Did you bring me anything?" It was their ritual. Every shift, if there were leftovers, if Chef Raymond was in a generous mood, Ethan would bring home something from the restaurant, usually bread, sometimes a dessert that hadn't sold, once an entire salmon fillet that had been prepared for a guest who'd left before ordering. "Not tonight, Bug." It was a weird evening. Lily looked up from her homework, studying him with that unnerving intensity that reminded him she was too smart for her age, too observant. "Because of your face?" "Yeah, because of my face." "Did someone hit you?" The question hung in the air between them, and Ethan understood he was at a crossroads. He could lie, could deflect, could protect her from the ugliness of what had happened. Or he could tell her some version of the truth, could teach her that sometimes bad things happen to good people, and it wasn't fair, but you survived it anyway. "A guest got very angry and did something she shouldn't have done," he said carefully. "But I'm okay. And she's the one who got in trouble, not me." "Good." Lily's voice was fierce, protective in the way children are when they love someone. "People shouldn't hit." "No, they shouldn't. Unless it's self-defense, like you taught me." Ethan had started teaching Lily basic self-defense 6 months ago. Simple techniques that focused on awareness and escape rather than confrontation. How to yell loudly enough to attract attention, how to break a grip on a wrist, how to run and where to run to. It had seemed important, necessary even, to give her tools he'd never had as a child. But now, sitting in her small room with his face still burning from a stranger's handprint, he wondered if he was preparing her for a world he'd already failed to protect her from. "Exactly like I taught you," he agreed. "Now finish your homework so I can read to you." They made it through 2 chapters of Narnia before Lily's eyes started drifting closed. Ethan tucked the blanket around her shoulders, kissed her forehead, and stayed there for a long moment just watching her breathe. This, he thought, this was what mattered. Not Madeline Cross, not the restaurant, not his wounded pride. Just this small person who trusted him completely. Mrs. Chen was waiting in the living room when he emerged, 2 cups of tea already poured on the coffee table. "Sit," she ordered, and Ethan sat, too tired to argue. "There's something else you're not telling me," she said after a moment. Ethan wrapped his hands around the teacup, letting the heat ground him. "The woman, Madeline Cross, she's connected, rich, powerful, the kind of person who could make my life very difficult if she wanted to." "So you think she'll retaliate?" I think people like her don't accept losing. And tonight, in front of all those witnesses, all those cameras, she lost. Badly. He took a sip of tea, barely tasting it. My manager says I'm protected, says the security footage is clear, says the restaurant will stand behind me. But managers say a lot of things until it becomes inconvenient. Mrs. Chen was quiet for a moment, her teacup held between both palms. You know what I think? I think you've been waiting for the other shoe to drop for 3 years. Ever since Claire died, and you became everything to that little girl. You've been so afraid of failing her that you've forgotten how to believe you might succeed. The observation landed with uncomfortable accuracy. Ethan wanted to deny it, wanted to argue, but Mrs. Chen had earned honesty through countless evenings of watching Lily, of accepting payment in whatever form he could manage, of never once making him feel small for needing help. I'm tired, he said instead, which was its own kind of truth. I'm tired of fighting for scraps, tired of swallowing disrespect, tired of being invisible except when someone needs a target. Tonight I stopped being invisible and I'm terrified of what that costs. Maybe, Mrs. Chen said gently, invisibility was costing you more than you realized. They sat in silence after that, drinking tea while the apartment building settled around them. Footsteps overhead, muffled television from next door, the distant sound of traffic from the street below. Normal sounds, ordinary life continuing while Ethan's felt suspended in amber, waiting to crack. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a text from Marco. Owner wants to meet tomorrow, 10 a.m., just to talk. You're not in trouble. Ethan showed Mrs. Chen the message. She read it and shrugged. So you go, you talk, you tell them exactly what happened. The truth is on your side. The truth hasn't always been enough, Ethan said quietly, thinking of custody hearings and social workers and lawyers who'd looked at his background. Martial arts instructor, no college degree, young father overwhelmed by tragedy, and seen liability instead of love. But Mrs. Chen was already standing, gathering her purse, preparing to return to her own apartment down the hall. Well, tonight it was. That woman attacked you and fell on her own arrogance. Let tomorrow worry about itself. After she left, Ethan locked the door and stood in the center of his living room, this small space that he'd made into a home through sheer force of will. Secondhand furniture, walls painted a cheerful yellow that was supposed to make the space feel bigger. Lily's artwork held to the refrigerator with alphabet magnets. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. He pulled out his phone, against his better judgment, and searched for Madeline Cross. The results were immediate and extensive. Investment banker at Prometheus Capital. Featured in Forbes, Wall Street Journal, Business Insider. Estimated net worth between 50 and 70 million. A profile that described her as ruthless but brilliant, someone who'd built a fortune by identifying struggling companies and either salvaging them through hostile restructuring or profiting from their collapse. There were photos. Her at charity galas, at business conferences, always perfectly composed, always in control. In none of them did she look like a woman who'd end up sprawled on a restaurant floor, defeated by her own rage and a waiter's simple sidestep. Ethan clicked on the news section, wondering if the incident had already leaked to the press. Nothing yet, but it was only a matter of hours. Someone in that restaurant had recorded video, and videos had a way of finding their way online, especially when they showed powerful people being humbled. He thought about calling his old instructor, Master Kim, who taught him everything he knew about Muay Thai, and about discipline, and about how violence should always be the last option, never the first. But it was past midnight, and what would he even say? That he'd finally used his training in the real world, and it had felt both easier and harder than he'd expected? Instead, Ethan checked the locks again, looked in on Lily one more time, still sleeping, one arm flung over her head in complete trust that the world would be the same when she woke, and made his way to his own room. Sleep didn't come. He lay in the darkness, replaying the evening frame by frame, analyzing every moment like footage from a training session. He should have walked away sooner, should have insisted on a table transfer the moment Madeline started her critiques. Should have. But he also knew that walking away only worked when the other person let you go. And Madeline Cross had been determined to make him an object lesson, a demonstration of her power and his powerlessness. She'd just chosen the wrong person to demonstrate on. The thought brought with it an uncomfortable realization. Part of him, a small, dark part he didn't like to acknowledge, had felt something close to satisfaction when she'd fallen. Not at her pain, but at the public collapse of her carefully maintained dominance. For just a moment, she'd been the one who was powerless, the one who was humiliated, the one looking up instead of down. Ethan didn't like that part of himself, didn't like the pleasure that came from someone else's defeat, even someone who'd spent the evening trying to destroy his dignity. It felt too close to the mentality that had made him a good fighter, that predatory instinct that assessed weaknesses and knew exactly how to exploit them. He'd walked away from that life because he'd seen where it led, had watched talented fighters become addicted to the adrenaline and the violence, had seen relationships crumble and bodies break down and mental health deteriorate. When Claire had gotten pregnant, when they'd decided to keep the baby despite being young and unprepared and terrified, Ethan had made a choice. He would be a father first and everything else second. Then Claire had died, and that choice had become the only thing holding him together. His phone lit up in the darkness. Another text, this time from a number he didn't recognize. Ethan considered ignoring it, letting it wait until morning, but insomnia and anxiety made poor companions for patience. The message was brief. "This is Richard Chen from tonight. I wanted you to know that I've spoken with my colleagues and will be providing witness statements supporting your account of events. What Madeline did was inexcusable. I apologize for not intervening sooner." Ethan stared at the text, reading it 3 times to make sure he understood correctly. Richard Chen, the silver-haired businessman who'd tried twice to stop Madeline's escalation, who'd walked out with his colleagues when she'd slapped Ethan. He was offering support, taking a stand against someone who probably had significant power in their shared industry. "Thank you," Ethan typed back. "That means more than you know." The response came quickly. "I have a daughter your age. If someone treated her the way Madeline treated you, I'd want to believe that someone would stand up for her. Good luck tomorrow." Something in Ethan's chest loosened slightly, some knot of tension he'd been carrying since leaving the restaurant. He wasn't completely alone in this. There were witnesses, there was footage, there were people willing to tell the truth, even when it was inconvenient. Maybe Mrs. Chen was right. Maybe the truth would be enough. He finally fell asleep around 3 in the morning. His dreams a confused jumble of restaurant tables and fighting rings, of Lily calling for him while he was trapped behind glass, of Madeline's face transforming into the judge who'd granted him custody, saying over and over, "You're not good enough. You were never good enough." The alarm went off at 7, brutally early after so little sleep, but Lily had school and routines mattered. Ethan dragged himself out of bed, made breakfast, cereal and toast, nothing fancy but consistent, and helped his daughter get ready while keeping his own exhaustion hidden behind practiced normalcy. "Are you going to work today?" Lily asked, around a mouthful of Cheerios. "I have a meeting first, then maybe. We'll see." "Will the mean lady be there?" Ethan paused in the middle of packing her lunch. "What do you know about a mean lady?" "I heard you and Mrs. Chen talking last night. The walls are thin." She said it matter-of-factly, without accusation. "Is she going to try to take me away?" The question hit him like a physical blow, all his worst fears given voice by the one person he'd been trying to protect from them. Ethan abandoned the lunch bag and knelt down next to Lily's chair, bringing himself to her eye level. "No," he said firmly. "Nobody is taking you away from me. Ever. What happened last night was between me and an adult who behaved badly. It has nothing to do with you, and it doesn't change anything about us." "Promise?" "Promise." Lily studied his face with those 2 old eyes, measuring his sincerity, and must have found it sufficient because she nodded and returned to her cereal. But Ethan remained kneeling there for a moment longer, understanding that the stakes of today's meeting had just gotten higher. It wasn't just about his job anymore, wasn't just about pride or income. It was about proving to his daughter that promises meant something, that the world was safe, that her father was strong enough to protect them both. Even when he wasn't sure he believed it himself. The walk to school was quiet, Lily's hand small and trusting in his, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders with each step. Other parents nodded to him in passing, some with familiar faces from years of school drop-offs, none of them aware that his entire life might be about to implode. "Have a good day, Bug," Ethan said at the school entrance, crouching down for a hug. You too, Daddy. Don't let the mean lady win. He watched her disappear through the doors, bright purple backpack visible until the crowd of children swallowed her, and felt the weight of her faith in him settle like armor. Whatever happened next, he would handle it. He had to. The meeting at Lumiere was scheduled for 10, which gave Ethan 2 hours to prepare. He went home, showered properly for the first time since yesterday, put on his one good suit, bought secondhand but clean and pressed, and tried to remember the last time he'd had to present himself as something other than a waiter or a father. The face looking back from the bathroom mirror was familiar but somehow stranger than usual. The bruise from Madeline's slap had deepened overnight, a clear handprint visible across his left cheek despite his attempt to cover it with the concealer he'd bought when Lily had asked why he always looked tired. His eyes were shadowed, older than 32 had any right to be. But underneath the exhaustion and the anxiety, there was something else, a kind of steel he'd thought he'd left behind in the fighting ring. The part of him that knew how to take a hit and stay standing, that understood pain was temporary but quitting was permanent. He'd need that part of himself today. The drive to Lumiere felt surreal in daylight, the building less imposing without its evening lighting and wealthy clientele. Ethan parked in the employee lot, noticed Marco's car already there, along with several others he didn't recognize, and felt his pulse quicken. Marco met him at the employee entrance, looking exhausted. "How are you holding up?" "I've been better." "What's the situation?" "Owner is inside with the restaurant's lawyer and head of HR. They want your statement, want to make sure we're all on the same page about what happened." Marco's expression was sympathetic but cautious. "Madeline's attorney called this morning. They're threatening to sue for assault." Of course they were. Ethan had expected nothing less, but hearing it confirmed still felt like a punch to the gut. "I never touched her." "We know. The footage proves it. But her lawyer is claiming you used advanced combat techniques to cause her fall, that you deliberately put her in danger by not catching her or something." Marco shook his head. "It's garbage, but it's expensive garbage that could drag on for months." They walked through the quiet restaurant, chairs still on tables from the night crew's closing routine, morning light streaming through windows that overlooked the city. In the evening, this place sparkled with wealth and possibility. In the harsh light of morning, it just looked like what it was. A business, calculating costs and liability, measuring loyalty against legal exposure. The owner's office was in the back, past the kitchen where prep cooks were already working, past the storage rooms and employee lockers. Mr. Castellano was behind his desk, flanked by a woman in a sharp blazer who introduced herself as Patricia Monroe, attorney, and a younger man who was apparently Gerald from HR. "Ethan, please sit." Mr. Castellano gestured to the chair across from him. He was in his 60s, second-generation restaurateur, someone who'd built Lumiere's reputation on excellence and discretion. "How are you feeling?" "Honestly, anxious." "Understandable. You had a traumatic experience last night." Patricia leaned forward, legal pad open in front of her. "I've reviewed the security footage and taken statements from staff and guests. What I need now is your account, in your own words, of everything that happened from the moment Ms. Cross entered the restaurant until you left the building." So Ethan told the story again, carefully, chronologically, trying to include every detail no matter how small. The initial complaints, the escalating criticism, the comments about his hands, the slap, his attempt to walk away, her second attack, his evasion, her fall. Patricia took notes without interrupting, her expression neutral. When he finished, she reviewed her pages for a long moment before looking up. "Your story is consistent with every other account we've received and with the video evidence. You are not in any legal jeopardy regarding the incident itself." She paused. "However, Ms. Cross's attorney is pursuing a different angle. They're arguing that your martial arts background represents a dangerous element that the restaurant should have disclosed to guests, and that your presence on the floor created an implicit threat." "That's insane," Marco said from where he stood near the door. "Ethan has worked here for 3 years without a single incident." "I agree it's a weak argument," Patricia said, "but it's the argument they're making, and given Ms. Cross's resources and profile, they can afford to make noise about it even if they eventually lose." Mr. Castellano cleared his throat. "Which brings us to the difficult part of this conversation. Ethan, you're a good employee, one of our best. But we're a small operation, and a prolonged legal battle could damage our reputation and our financing. Ethan felt the conversation's direction like a cold wind. You're letting me go. We're offering you a severance package, Gerald from HR interjected quickly. 3 months' salary, continuation of health benefits for 6 months, and a positive reference. In exchange, you'd sign an agreement not to speak publicly about the incident or pursue any legal action against the restaurant. The words felt distant, echoing like they were reaching Ethan through water. They were paying him to disappear, to make this problem go away quietly, to absolve them of any responsibility for what had happened to him in their dining room while he was doing his job. And if I don't sign? Patricia's expression softened slightly. Then you remain employed, but we can't guarantee your hours won't be reduced as we evaluate our staffing needs. And without a settlement agreement, if Ms. Cross's lawsuit proceeds and you're named as a co-defendant along with the restaurant, we wouldn't be able to provide legal representation for you specifically. There it was, laid out with brutal clarity. Take the money and go, or stay, and fight alone against an opponent with unlimited resources. Ethan looked at Mr. Castellano, this man he'd worked for loyally, who'd complimented his professionalism countless times, who'd trusted him with VIP guests. What would you do? If you were me? The owner had the grace to look uncomfortable. I'd take the severance. 3 months gives you time to find something else, and the reference will help. Fighting this, even if you win eventually, will cost you more than you gain. So she wins, Ethan said quietly. She assaults me, tries to ruin me, and she wins because she can afford better lawyers. She doesn't win, Patricia said. She's lost her business relationships. Richard Chen and his colleagues have already pulled their investment. She's got video of her attacking a service worker all over social media as of this morning. Her reputation is taking a massive hit. But that doesn't change your reality, which is that prolonged litigation would be devastating for you financially and personally. Ethan closed his eyes, thinking of Lily, of the promise he'd made that morning, of 3 years of careful stability about to crumble. The severance would cover their rent, would give him breathing room to find another job, would let him avoid a court battle that could be used against him in custody disputes. It was the smart choice, the practical choice. It was also surrender. Can I have 24 hours to think about it? Mr. Castellano nodded. Of course, but Ethan, understand that either way you're not scheduled to work until this is resolved. We're calling it administrative leave, paid for now, but that's the situation. The meeting ended shortly after, with assurances and handshakes that felt hollow. Marco walked Ethan back to his car, neither of them speaking until they were outside, away from the building's careful professionalism. This is wrong, Marco finally said. Yeah, it is. You should fight it. You should make them stand behind you. Ethan leaned against his Honda, feeling every hour of missed sleep, every ounce of stress. With what, Marco? I can't afford a lawyer. I can barely afford my rent. Fighting this means risking everything on principle, and principle doesn't keep my daughter fed. So you're just going to let her get away with it? She's not getting away with anything. You heard Patricia. Her reputation is already damaged. But my reputation, my ability to work, my custody of Lily, those I can't afford to risk. Marco looked like he wanted to argue more, but something in Ethan's expression must have stopped him. Instead, he just gripped Ethan's shoulder briefly. Whatever you decide, I'll back you, for whatever that's worth. It's worth a lot. The drive home felt longer than usual, the midday traffic a surreal backdrop to the dissolution of his employment. Ethan's mind kept circling back to the same question. When had he become someone who accepted being a victim? When had survival become synonymous with surrender? He knew the answer. It had happened gradually, over 3 years of single parenthood, of prioritizing Lily's needs over his own pride, of swallowing small indignities to avoid larger catastrophes. Somewhere along the way, he'd stopped being Ethan Brooks the fighter and become Ethan Brooks the survivor, and there was a difference. Survivors endured. Fighters pushed back. His phone rang as he pulled into his apartment parking lot, an unknown number, which he almost didn't answer. But unemployment made him cautious about missing calls, so he picked up. Is this Ethan Brooks? The voice was female, professional, unfamiliar. Yes. Who's calling? My name is Jennifer Walsh. I'm a reporter with the Metro Daily. I'm calling about an incident last night at Lumiere Restaurant involving you and investor Madeline Cross. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" And there it was, the story leaking out, becoming public property, about to be filtered through whatever narrative sold the most papers or generated the most clicks. "I'm not interested in making a statement," Ethan said carefully. "I understand, but Mr. Brooks, the video from last night is already online and going viral. Ms. Cross's representatives are putting out their version of events. I think you deserve the opportunity to tell your side." Ethan closed his eyes, gripping the steering wheel. "What video?" Several guests recorded the altercation. The most widely shared version shows Ms. Cross slapping you attempting to leave, and her subsequent attack and fall. It's been viewed over 2 million times since midnight. 2 million. The number felt incomprehensible, meaningless. 2 million strangers watching the worst moment of his life, forming opinions, choosing sides, none of them knowing or caring about the real consequences playing out in his actual existence. "I still don't have a statement," Ethan said. "Fair enough. But if you change your mind, or if you find yourself being misrepresented in the media, please call me." She gave him her number, which he didn't write down, and the call ended. Ethan sat in his car for a long time after that, watching people come and go from his building, normal people with normal problems, their lives not exploding across social media, their jobs not hanging by threads. Eventually, he went inside where Mrs. Chen was waiting in the hallway as if she'd sensed he'd need her. "How'd it go?" she asked. "They're offering me severance to walk away quietly." And I don't know what to do." Mrs. Chen unlocked her door and gestured him inside. Her apartment was the mirror image of his, but felt entirely different. Furniture that matched, photos of family covering every surface, the accumulated warmth of a life fully lived. "Sit," she ordered, already putting a kettle on. "Tell me everything." So he did. The whole sorry tale of legal threats and viral videos and impossible choices. Mrs. Chen listened without interrupting, her face growing increasingly stern. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment, pouring tea with movements that suggested she was organizing her thoughts. "Here's what I know," she finally said. "You're a good father, you're a hard worker, and you've spent 3 years making yourself smaller to avoid conflict. Maybe it's time to stop." "Stop and what? Fight a millionaire in court while I'm unemployed? Risk losing custody when her lawyers start painting me as violent?" "Risk standing up for yourself," Mrs. Chen corrected. "Risk showing your daughter that sometimes the right thing is also the hard thing. Risk believing that you deserve better than this." The words hit harder than Ethan expected, finding all the soft places he'd been protecting. "What if I lose? What if you win?" She set her teacup down with a sharp click. "And I don't mean win in court. I mean win the part of yourself back that you've been sacrificing for safety. Your daughter needs food and shelter, yes, but she also needs a father who knows his own worth." Ethan wanted to argue, wanted to explain all the practical realities that made her advice impossible, but sitting in Mrs. Chen's warm apartment, drinking tea that tasted like care and challenge, he felt something shifting inside him, some tectonic plate of identity that had been stable for 3 years suddenly showing cracks. Maybe she was right. Maybe he'd been so focused on surviving that he'd forgotten how to live. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Against his better judgment, he opened it. The message was simple. "You made me look weak. You'll regret that." No signature, but Ethan didn't need one. He knew exactly who it was from and what it meant. Madeline Cross wasn't done with him yet. The text message sat on Ethan's phone screen like a coiled snake, venomous even in its simplicity. Mrs. Chen leaned over to read it, her expression darkening. "That's a threat," she said flatly. "You need to show this to the police." "And say what? A wealthy woman sent me an anonymous text after I embarrassed her in public? They'll file a report and nothing will happen." Ethan set his phone face down on the table, as if that could make the message disappear. Besides, going to the police means creating more documentation, more paper trail that could be twisted into me being the aggressor. Or it means establishing a pattern of harassment. Mrs. Chen's voice had taken on the steel quality that suggested she was done with patience. "Ethan, this woman attacked you once already. What makes you think she'll stop?" The question hung in the air between them, unanswerable because they both knew the truth. People like Madeline Cross didn't stop. They escalated. They had the resources and the vindictiveness to turn revenge into a hobby, and they rarely faced consequences for it. "I need to pick up Lily in an hour," Ethan said, standing abruptly. The conversation was spiraling into territory he wasn't ready to navigate, choices he wasn't prepared to make. "Thank you for the tea. For listening." Mrs. Chen walked him to the door but caught his arm before he could leave. "Whatever you decide about the severance, about fighting back or walking away, just promise me one thing. Promise you won't let fear make the decision for you." Ethan nodded, not trusting his voice, and escaped to his own apartment where the walls felt too close and the silence too loud. He pulled out his laptop, opened it to check his bank account balance, then closed it again without looking. Some numbers were better left unknown when you were trying to maintain hope. Instead, he navigated to a news website, searching for his own name with the kind of morbid curiosity that he knew was unhealthy but couldn't resist. The results came back immediately, a cascade of headlines that made his stomach turn. Video: Waiter uses martial arts training against restaurant guest. Investment banker Madeline Cross involved in altercation at luxury restaurant. Viral moment: when the quiet ones fight back. Ethan clicked on the first video link, watching footage taken from someone's phone at a nearby table. The quality was grainy but clear enough. There was Madeline, standing too close, her voice rising. There was Ethan, plates in hand, trying to step back. The slap happened off screen, but the sound of it carried, sharp and unmistakable. Then came the moment he'd been dreading to see from an outside perspective. Madeline lunging at him, hands extended like claws. His body moving almost before his brain registered the threat, pivoting with the fluid economy of someone who'd trained the response into muscle memory. The plates falling, shattering across marble. Madeline's momentum carrying her forward into empty space where Ethan had been a split second before. Her fall seemed to happen in slow motion in the video, her expression shifting from rage to surprise to fear in the space of a heartbeat. The sound when she hit the ground was sickening even through phone speakers, and the collective gasp from the restaurant patrons created an audio backdrop that made the whole thing feel staged, theatrical. But it wasn't staged. It was real and permanent, and now immortalized in high definition for the world to judge. The comments section below the video was a battlefield. Half the commenters praised Ethan for his restraint, calling him a hero for not fighting back. The other half accused him of using excessive force, of being a dangerous martial artist who should never have been working with the public, of deliberately humming Madeline even though the video clearly showed otherwise. "This is what happens when restaurants hire thugs instead of real professionals," one comment read, with over 3,000 likes. "Good for him," read another. "Rich people think they can treat service workers like garbage. She got what she deserved." Ethan closed the laptop before he could read more, his hands shaking slightly. This was his life now, dissected by strangers, reduced to a 30-second clip that people would watch while eating lunch or waiting in line, something to share and argue about and forget by tomorrow when the next viral moment came along. Except he wouldn't forget, and neither would Madeline Cross, judging by that text message. His phone rang again, another unknown number. This time Ethan let it go to voicemail, then listened to the message with growing dread. "Mr. Brooks, this is Detective Sarah Mendez with the City Police Department. I'm investigating a complaint filed by Madeline Cross regarding an incident at Lumiere Restaurant. I'd appreciate if you could come down to the station at your earliest convenience to give a statement. You're not under arrest or being charged with anything at this time, but Ms. Cross's legal team has been quite insistent that we investigate. Please call me back at this number." So it was starting. The legal machinery grinding into motion, positioning him as a suspect rather than a victim, forcing him to defend himself against accusations that should never have been taken seriously in the first place. Ethan saved the detective's number and immediately called the restaurant's lawyer, Patricia Monroe. She answered on the second ring, her voice brisk and professional. "I just got a call from police about giving a statement," Ethan said without preamble. "What do I do?" "Don't go alone. I'll accompany you as the restaurant's counsel, and I'd recommend we do it today rather than letting it hang over your head. Can you make it to the station by 3? "What about my daughter? School gets out at 3:15. "Bring her to my office first. My secretary can watch her while we handle this. It shouldn't take more than an hour." Patricia's tone softened slightly. Ethan, This is standard procedure when someone with resources files a complaint. The detective will likely watch the video, hear your statement, and close the case. Don't panic. Easy for her to say. She wasn't the one whose entire existence was balanced on a knife edge, one wrong word away from disaster. But Ethan agreed to meet her at 2:30, giving him just enough time to pick up Lily and explain why they were taking a detour before going home. The afternoon crawled by with agonizing slowness. Ethan tried to distract himself with household chores, with job searching, with anything that might keep his mind from spiraling. But every task felt pointless, performative, like rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. At 2:45, he stood outside Patricia's law office with Lily's hand in his, trying to project a calm he absolutely didn't feel. The building was downtown, all glass and steel, and the kind of understated wealth that came from charging $500 an hour. "Why are we here?" Lily asked for the third time, her backpack hanging heavy on her shoulders. "I need to talk to some people about work stuff. It's boring adult things. But Miss Patricia's secretary is really nice, and she has coloring books in her office." "I'm too old for coloring books," Lily informed him with 7-year-old dignity. "Then bring your homework. It won't take long, Bug, I promise." But Patricia met them in the lobby, shaking Lily's hand with the same seriousness she'd shown Ethan during their meeting. Her secretary, a woman named Carmen with kind eyes and graying hair, immediately engaged Lily in conversation about school and books, and whether she liked horses, and within minutes his daughter was settled at a desk with her math homework spread out, seemingly unconcerned about the strangeness of the situation. "Ready?" Patricia asked Ethan, already walking toward the elevator. "No, but let's go anyway." The police station was less intimidating than Ethan had feared, more bureaucratic than dramatic. Detective Mendez turned out to be a woman in her 40s with tired eyes and the demeanor of someone who'd seen enough human stupidity to be unsurprised by anything. She led them to a small interview room that smelled like stale coffee and resignation. "Mr. Brooks, thank you for coming in. I want to be clear up front that you're not being accused of anything criminal at this point. Ms. Cross's attorney filed a complaint alleging assault, but after reviewing the security footage and witness statements, I'm not seeing grounds for charges. However, I do need your official statement for the record." Relief flooded through Ethan so quickly it made him dizzy. "So this is just procedural?" "Essentially, yes. Walk me through what happened from your perspective." So Ethan told the story again, the third or fourth time depending on how he counted, the details becoming almost mechanical through repetition. Detective Mendez took notes without much reaction, occasionally pausing the recording to ask clarifying questions. "And when she came at you the second time, you moved out of the way. Can you describe exactly how you moved?" "I pivoted to my left and stepped back. It's a basic defensive maneuver, designed to remove yourself from the line of attack without engaging. I didn't push her, didn't strike her, didn't make any contact with her at all." "But you have extensive martial arts training." It wasn't a question, but Ethan answered anyway. 15 years of Muay Thai and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, yes, which is exactly why I knew how to de-escalate without violence. I was trained to control situations, not to create them. Detective Mendez made a note, her expression neutral. "Ms. Cross's attorney is arguing that your training made you a weapon, essentially, and that your evasive maneuver was designed to cause her to fall and injure herself." "That's absurd," Patricia interjected. "The video clearly shows Ms. Cross attacking him and losing her balance due to her own momentum and inappropriate footwear. Mr. Brooks literally did nothing except not be where she expected him to be." "I agree. Which is why, like I said, I'm not pursuing charges, but I needed this statement to close out the complaint officially." Detective Mendez clicked off the recorder and leaned back in her chair. "Off the record, Mr. Brooks, you showed remarkable restraint. A lot of people in your position would have reacted very differently." "I have a daughter," Ethan said quietly. "Reacting differently would have cost me everything." The detective's expression softened with understanding. "Well, for what it's worth, you made the right call. This complaint is being marked as unfounded, and I'll be recommending no further investigation. If Ms. Cross or her legal team continues to harass you, document everything and file your own complaint." The meeting ended shortly after, with handshakes and business cards and the overwhelming sensation of having dodged a bullet. Patricia walked Ethan back to her office, looking satisfied. That went as well as it could have. The police investigation being closed strengthens your position significantly if Cross's civil attorney tries to push forward with a lawsuit. So what do I do now? Now you decide whether you're signing that severance agreement or fighting to keep your job. Honestly, Ethan, with the police report in your favor and the video evidence, you have a stronger case than the restaurant wants to admit. They're trying to avoid hassle, but they're also potentially violating labor law by essentially terminating you for being the victim of an assault on their premises. The words landed with unexpected weight. Are you saying I should sue the restaurant? I'm saying you have options. If you sign the severance, you take the money and move on, but you also accept their narrative that you're a liability. If you refuse and force them to either keep you employed or formally terminate you, you put them in a difficult legal position. With my help, we could potentially negotiate a much better settlement, or even keep your job. But that costs money I don't have. Patricia smiled slightly. I'm already being paid by the restaurant to handle this matter. If you decide to fight, I could potentially argue that my fees should continue to be covered since they're the ones creating the legal exposure. It's unorthodox, but not impossible. Ethan looked at this woman who was offering him something he'd almost forgotten existed: advocacy. Someone willing to fight on his behalf, not out of charity, but because the law actually supported him. It felt surreal after years of swallowing injustice because fighting back seemed impossible. Can I think about it? Of course, but the severance offer expires in 23 hours. After that, the restaurant will likely take a harder stance. Patricia walked him to the reception area where Lily was showing Carmen her completed math homework. Whatever you decide, document everything. Save that threatening text. Record any communications. Protect yourself. The drive home should have felt triumphant. The police investigation closed, his lawyer suggesting he had leverage, the immediate crisis seemingly contained. But Ethan felt only exhaustion and a growing awareness that the fight wasn't over, was maybe just beginning. "Daddy, are you in trouble?" Lily asked from the back seat, her voice small. "No, Bug. Everything's okay." "You keep saying that, but your face looks worried." Ethan glanced at her in the rearview mirror, this perceptive child who saw too much and understood more than he wanted her to. Grown-up stuff is complicated sometimes, but I promise you, we're going to be fine. Because you're strong? Because we're strong. You and me together. That seemed to satisfy her, and she returned to looking out the window at the city passing by, this place that held both their home and their uncertainties, their safety and their threats. When they got back to the apartment, Mrs. Chen was waiting in the hallway again, her presence both comforting and slightly overwhelming. She took one look at Ethan's face and nodded toward her door. "Lily, come help me make dumplings. Your father needs a minute." "I want to stay with Daddy. And he wants you to learn how to make proper dumplings, so someday you can teach your own kids. Come on." Lily looked between them, clearly sensing the adult conversation being orchestrated around her, but the promise of cooking lessons won out. She followed Mrs. Chen inside, leaving Ethan alone in the hallway with his thoughts and his phone and the decision that was crystallizing with increasing clarity. He pulled up the threatening text message from Madeline. Read it again. Let the anger it sparked move through him instead of pushing it down. Then he called Patricia Monroe. "I'm not signing the severance," he said when she answered. "I want to fight." There was a pause, then, "Are you sure? This could get ugly." "It's already ugly, but I'm tired of pretending that accepting ugliness is the same as handling it. What do I need to do?" Patricia's voice took on a new energy, the tone of someone who enjoyed a good legal battle. "First, we draft a response to the restaurant refusing their offer and outlining your position that you were assaulted on their premises while performing your duties, and that any attempt to terminate you represents retaliation. Second, we file a formal complaint against Madeline Cross for harassment, using that text message as evidence. Third, we prepare for her attorney to escalate. And what does escalation look like? Honestly, I think they'll try to attack your character, your fitness as a parent, your past. They'll look for anything they can use to paint you as dangerous or unstable. You need to be prepared for that." Ethan thought about his life, about the years of martial arts training, about Claire's death and the custody battle with her parents, about every moment of struggle and survival that had brought him to this point. Let them look. Let them dig. He'd survived worse than scrutiny. Do it, he said. All of it. They spent the next hour on the phone, Patricia asking questions and taking notes while Ethan provided information he'd never thought would be relevant to a restaurant job. His training history, his teaching credentials from when he'd briefly run classes at a community gym, testimonials from Master Kim about his character and discipline. It felt strange, almost narcissistic, to catalog his own worth this way. But Patricia insisted it was necessary, building a counter-narrative to whatever Madeline's team would construct. By the time they hung up, Ethan felt wrung out, but also lighter, as if some burden he'd been carrying had been redistributed onto shoulders that could handle it better. He retrieved Lily from Mrs. Chen's apartment, where they'd apparently made 36 dumplings and his daughter had flour in her hair and joy on her face. "We saved you some for dinner," Lily announced proudly. "Mrs. Chen says I'm a natural." "She is," Mrs. Chen confirmed. "Good hands, patient, listens to instruction, unlike her father, who's impulsive and stubborn." Ethan accepted the container of dumplings and the criticism with equal grace. "Thank you for everything. Thank me by not backing down tomorrow when things get hard. That little girl needs to see her father stand up." That evening passed in the kind of domestic normalcy that felt precious given everything swirling around them. Ethan heated the dumplings, helped Lily with her reading homework, read her 2 chapters of Narnia instead of 1 because she asked nicely. They talked about her day at school, about the solar system project she was starting, about whether they could get a fish tank if Ethan found a new job. "Would you want a different job?" Lily asked as he tucked her in. "I want whatever job lets me take care of you and doesn't make me feel small. Haven't found that perfect combination yet, but I'm working on it." "I don't think you're small. I think you're the biggest person I know." The comment, delivered with 7-year-old seriousness, broke something open in Ethan's chest. He kissed her forehead, told her he loved her, and retreated to his own room before the emotion could overwhelm him completely. Sleep came easier that night, exhaustion overriding anxiety, and Ethan dreamed not of restaurants or lawyers, but of the training gym where he'd spent so many years. The smell of sweat and canvas, the rhythm of fists against bags, Master Kim's voice calling combinations in Korean-accented English. In the dream, he was young again, unbroken by loss, still believing that strength and discipline could solve any problem. He woke to his phone ringing at 6 in the morning, an hour before his alarm. The number was blocked, which usually meant spam, but something made him answer. "Mr. Brooks?" The voice was male, unfamiliar, carrying an edge of aggression. "This is David Winters, attorney for Madeline Cross. I'm calling to inform you that we're prepared to file both criminal and civil charges against you for assault and intentional infliction of emotional distress, unless you agree to a public apology and financial settlement." Ethan was awake instantly, his mind sharp despite the early hour. "I was cleared by the police yesterday. Detective Mendez closed the complaint as unfounded. The police investigation was inadequate. We have medical documentation of Ms. Cross's injuries from the fall you caused, psychological evaluation showing trauma and distress, and witness testimony about your threatening behavior throughout the evening." "That's a lie. The security footage shows everything that actually happened." "The security footage shows a martial arts expert using his training to harm a guest half his size. But we're not unreasonable, Mr. Brooks. Ms. Cross is willing to accept a written apology, posted to your social media, along with a payment of $50,000 in damages, and this all goes away quietly." The number was so absurd it took Ethan a moment to process it. $50,000. More than he made in a year for an assault he didn't commit to apologize for being attacked. "No," he said simply. "Excuse me?" "I said no. I'm not apologizing for something I didn't do, and I'm certainly not paying your client anything. If she wants to file charges, tell her to file them. I've got my own attorney, and we're prepared to countersue for harassment." There was a pause on the line, as if Winters hadn't expected resistance. "You're making a serious mistake. Do you understand what kind of resources Ms. Cross has? She can bury you in legal fees, ruin any chance you have of future employment, drag this out for years." "Then I guess it'll drag out for years. Have a good morning, Mr. Winters." Ethan hung up before the lawyer could respond, his hands shaking with adrenaline. He'd just declared war on someone with infinite resources and nothing but spite motivating her. It was possibly the stupidest thing he'd ever done. It also felt right in a way nothing had felt right in a long time. He texted Patricia immediately, recounting the conversation. Her response came back within minutes. Perfect. Document the call if you can remember details. They're showing their hand early, which suggests they're not as confident as they're pretending. Don't take any more calls without me present. The rest of the morning unfolded with surreal normalcy. Breakfast with Lily, the walk to school, other parents chatting about weekend plans and school fundraisers while Ethan's life was actively imploding in ways they couldn't see. He smiled, made appropriate responses, and felt like an actor playing the role of normal dad, while inside he was preparing for battle. Patricia called at 9 with news. The restaurant's ownership met this morning. They're withdrawing the severance offer and requesting you return to work tomorrow night. They are? Why? Because I pointed out that their attempt to pay you off could be construed as admission that they failed to provide a safe workplace. Also, the viral video has actually increased their reservation requests. People want to eat at the place where the hero waiter works. You're suddenly good for business. Ethan should have felt vindicated. Instead, he felt manipulated, reduced once again to a commodity valued only for his utility to others. And if I don't want to go back, then we negotiate an exit on your terms, not theirs. But Ethan, having your job back means having income while we deal with Cross's legal team. It gives you stability. It also means serving the next Madeline Cross who walks through the door, pretending I'm invisible while people treat me like furniture. The words came out harder than he intended, carrying 3 years of accumulated resentment. I can't do it anymore, Patricia. I can't go back to that. Then what do you want? It was a simple question that required a complicated answer. What did he want? Safety for Lily, yes. Financial stability, obviously. But underneath those necessities was something else. Something he'd been suppressing so long, he'd almost forgotten it existed. He wanted his dignity back. He wanted to feel like himself again, not the diminished version he'd become. He wanted Lily to see him stand up, exactly like Mrs. Chen had said. I want to settle with the restaurant on terms that give me 6 months of salary and benefits, enough time to figure out what comes next without desperation driving every decision. And I want to face Madeline Cross in court if it comes to that, because I'm done letting rich people think they can hurt whoever they want without consequences. Patricia was quiet for a moment. That's a tall order, but it's also principled and defensible. Give me a few days to negotiate with the restaurant. In the meantime, Cross's attorney will likely continue trying to intimidate you, steel yourself. The intimidation came faster than expected. By noon, Ethan's phone was flooded with messages from blocked numbers, some threatening legal action, others more personally vicious. Someone had found his social media accounts, which he barely used, and posted his home address in the comments of the viral video. The restaurant's Yelp page was being bombed with fake reviews accusing them of employing violent criminals. And through it all, scattered among the attacks, were messages of support from strangers who'd watched the video and seen what Ethan had seen. A man being abused, trying his best not to escalate, trying to walk away, trying to do everything right, and being punished for it anyway. Stay strong, one message read. You showed more restraint than most people would have. Don't let them break you. Another. As a server who's dealt with customers like this, thank you for standing up. Even accidentally, you stood up. But the message that hit Ethan hardest came from an account belonging to someone named Marcus Rivera, who wrote, I was at Lumiere that night at table 12. I watched that whole thing happen, and I did nothing. I sat there like everyone else and watched her humiliate you because intervening seemed awkward. I've been thinking about that for 2 days, about how many times I've been a coward by being polite. I'm sorry I didn't help you. You deserved better from all of us. Ethan read that message 3 times, feeling something shift in his understanding of the evening. He'd been so focused on Madeline, on his own response, on the immediate crisis, that he hadn't fully processed the role of everyone else in that room. The guests who'd watched and done nothing, the staff who'd been too afraid to intervene, the systemic acceptance of cruelty as long as it flowed downward from those with power. He typed a response. You don't owe me an apology, but maybe next time speak up. Not for me, for whoever needs it in the moment. That's how we change this. The rest of the day was spent documenting everything. Screenshots of threatening messages, a detailed timeline of events, Character references from people who'd known him for years. Patricia had been right about preparation. If this was going to be a war, Ethan needed ammunition. By the time he picked up Lily from school, he'd built a case file that painted a clear picture. A man who'd done everything right being punished by someone who'd done everything wrong, and a system that protected the latter because she could afford better lawyers. "Daddy, you look different," Lily observed as they walked home. "Different how?" "Taller. Like you're standing up straighter or something." Out of the mouths of children. "Maybe I am, Bug. Maybe I am." That evening, after Lily was asleep and the apartment was quiet, Ethan sat at his kitchen table with a beer he didn't particularly want and his phone displaying the viral video one more time. He watched himself move with the efficiency of 15 years training, watched Madeline fall with the inevitability of momentum meeting marble, watched the moment his careful invisibility shattered completely. And he realized something. There was no going back. That version of himself, the one who swallowed every insult and absorbed every slight in the name of survival, was gone. Whatever came next, legal battles, financial struggle, public scrutiny, he'd face it as himself. Fully himself, without apology. His phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. "Restaurant agreed to your terms, 6 months salary, continuation of benefits, positive reference, and a confidentiality clause that goes both ways. Sign the papers tomorrow and you're free." Freedom. After 3 years of careful captivity to necessity, he was finally free to choose what came next. Ethan raised his beer in a silent toast to the man in the video, the one who'd finally stopped shrinking, and replied to Patricia, "I'll be there at 9. Then he opened his laptop and began searching for martial arts gyms in the area that might need instructors, for community centers that offered self-defense classes, for any opportunity that would let him use his skills without apologizing for having them. The future was uncertain, probably difficult, possibly disastrous. But it was his again, and that made all the difference. Morning came with the weight of finality, the kind of day where everything either broke apart or fell into place. Ethan woke before his alarm, dressed in the same second-hand suit he'd worn to the police station, and tried to ignore the way his hands wanted to shake as he knotted his tie. Lily appeared in his doorway, already dressed for school, watching him with those serious eyes that missed nothing. "Is today important?" "Yeah, Bug. Today's important." "Are you scared?" The question caught him off guard, not because she'd asked, but because she'd given him permission to be honest. Children had a way of doing that, cutting through adult pretense to the truth underneath. "A little," he admitted. "But sometimes the right thing to do is scary. That doesn't mean you don't do it." Lily crossed the room and wrapped her arms around his waist, squeezing tight. "You're the bravest person I know." Ethan held his daughter, breathing in the strawberry scent of her shampoo, and felt something settle in his chest. Whatever happened in the next few hours, this was what mattered. Not the money, not the job, not even the principle of the thing. Just this small person who believed in him completely. "Come on," he said, pulling back and forcing lightness into his voice. "Let's get you to school so I can go be brave." Mrs. Chen was waiting in the hallway when they emerged, holding a thermos of coffee and a paper bag that smelled like fresh pastries. "Breakfast," she announced. "You'll need your strength." "Mrs. Chen, you don't have to—" "I don't do anything I don't want to do. Eat." She pressed the bag into his hands, then crouched down to Lily's level. "Your daddy is going to have a very good day. You know how I know?" "How?" "Because he's finally fighting back, and the universe likes people who fight back." She tapped Lily's nose gently. "Now go learn something important." The walk to school felt different this morning, the familiar route transformed by Ethan's awareness that this might be one of the last times he did this particular routine. After today, everything would change. Maybe for the better, maybe not, but definitely different. "Will you pick me up?" Lily asked at the school entrance. "Of course, same as always." "Even if things go bad at your meeting?" "Especially if things go bad. You and me, Bug. That's the constant." She seemed satisfied with that answer and disappeared into the building with a wave, her purple backpack bouncing against her shoulders. Ethan watched until she was out of sight, then turned toward downtown and the law office where he'd sign papers that would either free him or trap him in new ways. Patricia's office was busier than it had been during his last visit. Lawyers and assistants moving through corridors with purposeful efficiency. Patricia herself looked crisp and prepared, her desk organized with military precision, 3 copies of a settlement agreement laid out and waiting. "Good morning," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. "Sleep well?" "Not really." "Honest, I appreciate that." She slid 1 copy of the agreement toward him. "This is everything we discussed. 6 months' salary paid out over 6 months, health insurance continuation for the same period, a positive employment reference, and mutual non-disparagement clauses. The restaurant agrees not to say anything negative about you. You agree not to say anything negative about them." Ethan scanned the document, the legal language dense but comprehensible. "And I'm officially resigning, not being fired." "Correct. You're leaving voluntarily to pursue other opportunities. It protects both of you." Patricia leaned back in her chair. "But before you sign, there's something you should know. Madeline Cross's attorney called me this morning." The name sent a jolt through Ethan's system, adrenaline spiking before his rational mind could catch up. "What did he want?" "To offer you money. A significant amount of money, actually. $100,000 in exchange for a public statement saying that you regret the incident, that you should have handled it differently, and that Ms. Cross was justified in feeling threatened by your presence." $100,000. The number was so absurd it almost didn't compute. That was nearly 3 years of salary, enough to move Lily to a better school district, to pay off debts, to breathe for the first time in years. All he had to do was lie. Publicly, permanently. "What did you tell him?" Ethan asked, though he already knew what his answer would be. "I told him I'd present the offer to you, which I've now done. But Ethan, I need to be clear about something. If you reject this offer, Cross's team will escalate. They'll file the civil suit they've been threatening. It could take years to resolve, cost you money you don't have, and even if you win eventually, the process will be brutal. And if I take the money? Then you're admitting fault you don't have. You're letting her buy a version of history that paints you as the aggressor, and you're teaching your daughter that truth has a price tag." There it was, laid out with Patricia's characteristic directness. The choice wasn't really between money and principle. It was between 2 versions of himself, and only one of them could exist going forward. "I need to make a phone call," Ethan said. He stepped into the hallway, found a quiet corner, and dialed Master Kim's number. The call rang 4 times before his old instructor answered, voice gravelly with age and early morning. "Ethan, everything okay?" "I need advice." The words came out rushed, almost desperate. "Someone's offering me a lot of money to lie about something that happened, to say I was wrong when I wasn't. And I don't know if refusing that money makes me principled or just stupid." Master Kim was quiet for a long moment, the kind of silence that suggested he was choosing his words with care. "Tell me what happened." So Ethan told him everything. The incident at the restaurant, Madeline's attacks, his evasion, her fall, the aftermath that had consumed his life for the past 3 days. Master Kim listened without interrupting, his breathing the only sound through the phone. "You move the way I taught you," Master Kim finally said. "Minimum force, maximum efficiency, defense without aggression." "Yes." "And now someone wants to pay you to say that was wrong. They want to pay me to say I was threatening, that my training made me dangerous, that she was right to feel scared of me." "Were you threatening?" "No." "Was she right to feel scared?" "No. She was angry because I wouldn't let her humiliate me anymore." Master Kim made a sound that might have been approval or might have been sadness. "When I was young, younger than you are now, I had a student who got into a fight outside my gym. He used what I taught him to defend himself against 3 attackers, put all 3 in the hospital. The attackers' families sued him, sued me, said I was teaching violence. They offered me money to close my gym, to say my student was out of control, to disappear." "What did you do?" "I fought. Lost everything fighting, my savings, my building, nearly my reputation. Took me 5 years to rebuild. And you know what I learned?" "What?" "That some things are more expensive than money. Dignity is one of them. Self-respect is another. The ability to look yourself in the mirror and recognize who you see, that's worth more than any settlement." Master Kim's voice softened. "But I didn't have a child depending on me. You do." So maybe your calculation is different. Is it though? What good is providing for Lily if I'm teaching her that truth is negotiable? That's the right question. Only you know the right answer. They talked for a few more minutes about other things, Master Kim's health, his current students, whether Ethan might come by the gym sometime. But the real conversation was already over, the advice already given, and Ethan felt something crystallize inside him with perfect clarity. He returned to Patricia's office, sat down across from her and said, "Tell Cross's attorney no. Tell him if he wants to file his lawsuit, he should file it. I'll see them in court." Patricia's expression flickered with something that might have been respect or might have been concern. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." Ethan picked up a pen and signed the settlement agreement with the restaurant, his signature bold and clear across the bottom of each page. Now let's deal with what comes next. What came next arrived faster than expected. By noon, Madeline Cross's attorney had filed a civil suit seeking $2 million in damages for assault, battery, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and negligent hiring on the part of Lumiere. The complaint was a masterpiece of creative fiction, painting Ethan as a violent martial artist with a history of aggression who'd stalked and terrorized a defenseless businesswoman. Patricia read through it with increasing incredulity, occasionally shaking her head or making notes in the margins. "This is mostly garbage, but there are a few concerning elements. They've found your custody case from 3 years ago and are using your in-laws' initial opposition to paint you as unstable. They've also got statements from other restaurant workers claiming you were intense and intimidating. I've worked there for 3 years without a single incident." "I know. But they're building a narrative of simmering violence waiting to explode. It's manipulative, but it's also effective storytelling." Patricia looked up from the documents. "We need to file our response within 30 days. But before we do that, I want to depose some witnesses, starting with the people who were actually there that night." The depositions began the following week. A parade of restaurant guests and staff members called to give their sworn testimony about what they'd witnessed. Ethan sat through each one in Patricia's conference room, listening to people describe the worst night of his life from their various perspectives. Richard Chen, the silver-haired businessman, was unequivocal in his support. Ms. Cross was behaving abominably from the moment she sat down. She was rude, dismissive, and deliberately provocative toward Mr. Brooks. When she slapped him, I was shocked. When she attacked him again, I wasn't surprised. She'd clearly lost control of herself. His 2 colleagues gave similar testimony, both expressing regret that they hadn't intervened sooner. "We were there for business," one admitted. "Calling out a potential investor seemed like a bad career move at the time. In retrospect, it was cowardice." Sarah, the server who Marco had mentioned crying after a previous encounter with Madeline, was visibly nervous but determined. "She came in every few weeks, and she was always terrible, always finding fault, always making someone feel small. When I heard what happened to Ethan, my first thought was finally someone didn't just take it." But not all the testimony was supportive. Another server, a young man named Travis, who'd started a month before the incident, claimed Ethan had always been weird and standoffish, and that he'd seen him practicing combat moves in the break room. "What kind of combat moves?" Patricia asked. "I don't know, like stretching and stuff, but aggressive stretching." "Aggressive stretching?" "Yeah, like he was preparing for something." Patricia made a note, her expression neutral. Later, in private, she told Ethan that Travis had been reprimanded twice for sexual harassment and was likely hostile because Ethan had reported him. His testimony won't hold much weight, but it shows they're trying everything. The most painful deposition came from Marco, Ethan's former floor manager, who clearly didn't want to be there and struggled with every question. "Would you describe Mr. Brooks as a good employee?" Patricia asked. "Yes, one of the best." "Did you ever witness him being aggressive or threatening toward guests?" "No, never." "What about the night of the incident with Ms. Cross?" Marco hesitated, and in that hesitation, Ethan saw the pressure he was under. He was professional throughout. Even when she was berating him, he stayed calm, but what? But there was a moment right before she slapped him where his whole demeanor changed, like he'd made some decision. I can't explain it exactly, but it felt like he'd stopped being the waiter and become someone else, someone harder. The observation landed with uncomfortable accuracy because Marco was right. That had been the moment when Ethan had stopped performing submission, when he'd decided he was done participating in his own degradation. But hearing it described this way, through the filter of someone trying not to damage him while also protecting themselves, made it sound ominous. Did this change in demeanor include any threatening behavior? Patricia pressed. No, he just stood differently, spoke differently, more direct. So he acted like someone who'd reached their limit of acceptable treatment? I guess, yeah. The deposition wrapped shortly after, with Marco apologizing to Ethan in the hallway, saying he'd tried to be fair but the restaurant's lawyers had coached him on what to emphasize. Ethan told him not to worry about it, that he understood, but the conversation left him feeling hollow. This was what fighting back looked like. Watching people you'd worked beside for years pick their words carefully to avoid being destroyed alongside you, reducing complex human moments to legal ammunition, having your entire character judged by strangers based on carefully edited testimony. The media attention didn't help. The viral video had spawned countless think pieces about class dynamics, about service worker abuse, about the ethics of self-defense. Ethan's face was everywhere, on news websites, in social media debates, even printed in newspapers alongside articles analyzing the incident from every possible angle. Some outlets painted him as a hero, a working-class champion who'd finally stood up to entitled wealth. Others suggested he was a dangerous individual whose martial arts background should disqualify him from public-facing work. The truth, which was that he was just a tired father who'd tried to walk away from a bad situation, got lost in the competing narratives. The attention made simple things complicated. Ethan couldn't walk Lily to school without someone recognizing him, wanting to share their opinion, or get a selfie, or express support that felt more like voyeurism. Other parents at the school started treating him differently, some with obvious admiration, others with visible discomfort, as if proximity to controversy might be contagious. "Mr. Brooks, do you have a moment?" It was Lily's teacher, Ms. Patterson, catching him at pickup one afternoon. "I wanted to let you know that some of the other children have been asking Lily about the video. We've addressed it as best we can, but I thought you should be aware." Ethan felt something cold settle in his stomach. What kind of questions? Whether you're a fighter, whether you hurt people. 7-year-old logic, you understand? They see headlines and fill in the blanks with imagination. Ms. Patterson's expression was sympathetic. "Lily's been handling it well, very matter of fact. She told them her dad helps people learn to be safe, but I wanted you to know in case she mentions anything at home." He thanked her and collected Lily, who was characteristically unfazed by the attention. "Tommy asked if you could beat up his dad," she reported cheerfully on the walk home. "I said probably, but you wouldn't because that's not what dads do." "That's exactly right. His dad is kind of mean, though. He yells at their dog." "Still not going to beat him up, Bug." "I know. I just wanted you to know he deserves it." The casual moral certainty of childhood, identifying who deserved punishment without understanding the complexities that constrained adult behavior. Ethan envied that clarity, even as he worked to prepare her for a world that rarely operated on such simple principles. The weeks ground forward with bureaucratic slowness. Patricia filed their response to Madeline's lawsuit, including a countersuit for harassment, malicious prosecution, and abuse of process. The legal documents flew back and forth like artillery, each side trying to damage the other's position before they ever reached a courtroom. Money became tight faster than Ethan had anticipated. The 6-month settlement from Lumiere helped, but legal fees ate into it with alarming speed. Patricia had agreed to work partially on contingency, meaning she'd take a larger percentage if they won, but there were still court costs, filing fees, expert witness deposits. Ethan picked up work where he could find it, a few shifts at a different restaurant where nobody knew his face, some private training sessions teaching self-defense to women who'd reached out after seeing the video. It wasn't enough to replace his lost income, but it kept them afloat. The hardest part was the waiting. Waiting for depositions, waiting for court dates, waiting for Madeline's legal team to make their next move. The uncertainty stretched like taffy, pulling thin but never quite breaking. Then, 6 weeks after the incident, something shifted. Patricia called on a Tuesday morning, her voice tight with suppressed excitement. "We just received discovery materials from Cross's attorney. You need to see this." Ethan was at her office within an hour, finding her conference room table covered with documents, printouts, and what appeared to be medical records. What am I looking at? He asked. Evidence that Madeline Cross has done this before, multiple times. Patricia spread out a series of complaints, lawsuits, and settled claims. She has a pattern of instigating confrontations with service workers, then claiming to be the victim when things go badly. In the past 8 years, she's filed complaints against 2 hotel employees, a flight attendant, her housekeeper, and 3 different restaurant workers. Ethan picked up one of the documents, reading about a waiter in Boston who'd allegedly threatened Madeline after she'd thrown a drink in his face. The case had settled quietly, with a confidentiality agreement that apparently wasn't as ironclad as Madeline's lawyers had thought. How did you get these? One of Richard Chen's colleagues knew someone who'd dealt with Cross before. They pointed me in the right direction, and I found a pattern. She targets people who can't fight back, service workers, employees, anyone in a position where defending themselves publicly would cost them their livelihood. Then she uses her resources to either force settlements or make their lives miserable. So I'm not special, just the latest target. You're the first one who fought back publicly. That's what makes this different. Patricia pulled out another document, this one recent. And it gets better. 3 of her previous victims reached out to me after seeing your story. They're willing to testify about their experiences with her, establish the pattern of behavior. For the first time since this nightmare had started, Ethan felt something like hope. Does this change our position? Dramatically, it transforms this from he said, she said into she has a documented history of this exact behavior. Her attorney is going to fight like hell to keep it out of court, claim it's prejudicial, but it's absolutely relevant to show her credibility and state of mind that night. Patricia's smile was sharp. We're going to win this, Ethan. Not might win, will win. The news should have felt vindicating, triumphant even. Instead, Ethan just felt tired. Tired of fighting, tired of being angry, tired of organizing his entire life around this woman who'd spent a single evening trying to destroy him. What happens next? He asked. We file an amended complaint including this pattern of behavior. We depose Cross herself, which should be enlightening. And we push for mediation. Now that we've got ammunition, her team will want to settle before this gets to trial and becomes public record. I don't want her money. Patricia looked at him carefully. What do you want? It was the same question Master Kim had posed weeks ago, and Ethan still didn't have a complete answer. He wanted his life back, but that life was gone. He wanted justice, but justice in the legal system meant money changing hands, not actual accountability. He wanted Madeline to understand what she'd done, to feel genuine remorse, but people like her rarely developed that kind of self-awareness. I want her to stop, he finally said. I want her to not be able to do this to someone else. I don't care about money. I want consequences that actually mean something. Then we push for a public admission of fault as part of any settlement. She issues a statement acknowledging her behavior, apologizing without caveats, and commits to therapy or anger management or something that at least pretends to address the underlying problem. Will her lawyers agree to that? If the alternative is going to trial with her entire history of abuse laid out in public testimony, yeah, they might. Pride is expensive, but public humiliation is priceless. Patricia began organizing the documents into folders. Let me work on this. But Ethan, prepare yourself for her to fight. People like Madeline Cross don't admit fault easily. The prediction proved accurate. Madeline's legal team responded to the amended complaint with aggressive motions to exclude the prior incidents, arguing they were irrelevant and prejudicial. Patricia fired back with case law and precedent, and the judge, a no-nonsense woman named Martinez, ultimately ruled that the pattern evidence was admissible, though she'd determine exactly how much during trial, which meant they were headed to court unless someone blinked first. The deposition of Madeline Cross was scheduled for a Friday morning, held at her attorney's office in a building that probably cost more per square foot than Ethan's entire apartment. He sat beside Patricia, facing the woman who'd assaulted him, and tried to see her clearly without the overlay of anger or fear. She looked smaller than he remembered, more ordinary. Expensive clothes and perfect makeup, yes, but underneath all that was just a person. Damaged in ways he couldn't see, acting out pain she probably didn't understand, hurting others to avoid examining herself. Ethan almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Patricia conducted the deposition with surgical precision, walking Madeline through her version of events with careful attention to every contradiction, every exaggeration, every place her story didn't align with video evidence or witness testimony. You stated in your complaint that Mr. Brooks was menacing throughout the evening. Can you define what you mean by menacing? Madeline's jaw tightened. He was cold, distant, like he was barely tolerating having to serve me. Is it menacing for a server to be professional but not warm? It felt threatening. What specifically did he do that was threatening? His whole demeanor, the way he looked at me, the way he looked at you. With what expression? I don't know. It's hard to describe. He just made me uncomfortable. Did he raise his voice? No. Make any aggressive gestures? No. Touch you in any way before you touched him? A pause. No. So when you slapped him, it was in response to him looking at you in a way that made you uncomfortable? He was being disrespectful. Disrespectful how? He wouldn't apologize properly. Wouldn't show proper deference. Patricia let that answer hang in the air for a moment, the entitlement in it obvious even to Madeline's own attorney, who shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Ms. Cross, have you ever filed complaints against other service workers? Objection, relevance, David Winters interjected immediately. Goes to pattern and credibility, Patricia countered. They went back and forth, but eventually Madeline was forced to answer, each admission pulling her deeper into the hole she'd dug. Yes, she'd complained before. Yes, she'd felt threatened before. Yes, she expected a certain standard of service and had no problem reporting when it wasn't met. By the end of 2 hours, Ethan, watching Madeline's careful composure crack at the edges, saw flashes of the rage that had driven her to attack him. She wanted to lash out at Patricia the same way she'd lashed out at him, but the deposition room wasn't a restaurant and there was no audience to perform for. She was just a person being held accountable, finally, and she hated it. The deposition ended with Madeline's attorney calling for a break and requesting a private sidebar with Patricia. Ethan waited in the lobby, watching expensive lawyers hustle between meetings, and wondered how many other stories like his were being negotiated in rooms just like this. Patricia emerged 20 minutes later looking satisfied. They want to settle? For how much? They're offering $500,000, complete dismissal of their suit, and a confidentiality agreement. $500,000. The number was so absurd after months of scraping by that Ethan had to laugh. And the catch? No admission of wrongdoing, no public statement, just money and silence. No. Patricia had expected this answer. They'll go higher, probably to $750,000, maybe even $1 million if we push. Ethan, that's life-changing money. It's also blood money. It's paying me to let her keep doing this to other people. He stood up, suddenly desperate to be out of this building with its marble floors and the scent of wealth. Tell them we want what we asked for. Public acknowledgement, apology, therapy requirement. If they won't agree, we'll see them in court. 2 days later, Patricia called with a different offer, $300,000. A public statement from Madeline acknowledging her behavior was inappropriate and apologizing to Ethan specifically, and a requirement that she complete anger management counseling. Still no admission of legal wrongdoing, but as close as they were likely to get. It's not perfect, Patricia said, but it's real consequences. The apology will be public record. The counseling requirement is enforceable, and the money gives you options. You can donate it, use it for Lily, whatever feels right. Ethan thought about his daughter, about the years of struggling ahead, about the statement this would make versus the statement he'd wanted to make. Sometimes winning wasn't getting everything you wanted. Sometimes it was getting enough to call it victory and move forward. Okay, he said. Let's accept. The settlement was finalized the following week, signed by both parties and filed with the court. Madeline's statement was brief and clearly written by lawyers, but it was also public and permanent. I regret my behavior toward Ethan Brooks at Lumiere Restaurant. My actions were inappropriate, and I apologize for any distress I caused. I'm taking steps to address my conduct going forward. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't justice in any meaningful sense. But it was acknowledgement, and sometimes that was enough. The media covered the settlement extensively, most outlets treating it as vindication for Ethan and a rare moment of accountability for someone with Madeline's resources. The comment sections filled with people sharing their own stories of mistreatment by employers, customers, and others with power over their livelihoods. "This is bigger than you," Mrs. Chen said the evening after the settlement was announced. She'd come over with celebratory dumplings, insisting they mark the occasion properly. "You didn't just stand up for yourself, you showed people it's possible to stand up. That matters." Maybe it did. Maybe that was worth all the stress, all the uncertainty, all the nights lying awake wondering if he'd made the right choice. Or maybe it just was what it was. A difficult situation he'd handled as best he could, with consequences he'd learned to live with. Either way, it was over. Finally, mercifully over. That night, after Lily was asleep and the apartment was quiet, Ethan sat with the settlement paperwork spread before him and tried to feel victorious. The money would solve immediate problems: back rent, medical bills, maybe even a small college fund for Lily. The apology would satisfy something in him that had needed satisfaction. But mostly, he just felt the absence of pressure, like a weight he'd been carrying had finally been set down. His shoulders dropped, his jaw unclenched. For the first time in months, he took a full breath and let it out slowly. He was free. Not perfect, not whole, but free. And that would have to be enough. The settlement money arrived in Ethan's account on a Tuesday morning, appearing as a number so large it looked fake, like someone had made a typo when entering the amount. $300,000, minus Patricia's contingency fee and various court costs, leaving him with just over $200,000 in actual take-home. Life-changing money, Patricia had called it. And she was right, though not in the ways Ethan had initially imagined during those desperate months of fighting. The money didn't erase the trauma of what had happened, didn't undo the viral video that still circulated online, didn't make him forget the feeling of Madeline's hand connecting with his face or the weeks of uncertainty that followed. What it did was give him space. Space to breathe, space to think, space to choose what came next without desperation driving every decision. "What are you going to do with it?" Lily asked over breakfast the morning after the transfer cleared. She was eating cereal with the focused intensity she brought to everything, her homework already completed and packed in her backpack. "First, I'm paying all our bills, every single one, completely caught up." Ethan ticked items off on his fingers. "Then I'm putting money aside for your college. Then I'm going to figure out what kind of work I actually want to do, not just what I have to do." What do you want to do? It was such a simple question, one he'd stopped asking himself years ago when survival became the only goal that mattered. What did he want? Not what could he tolerate, not what paid enough, not what kept them afloat. What actually brought him satisfaction, made him feel like himself. "I think I want to teach," Ethan said slowly, the words forming even as he spoke them. "Self-defense, discipline, the things Master Kim taught me. But for people who really need it, not wealthy people paying for a hobby, but people trying to feel safe in their own lives." Lily nodded seriously, as if this made perfect sense. "Like you taught me." "Exactly like I taught you." The idea crystallized over the following days, taking shape through conversations with Mrs. Chen, with Patricia, with Master Kim, who was delighted by the prospect of his former student returning to teaching. Not opening a commercial gym with expensive memberships and intimidating equipment, but something smaller, more accessible. Community-based classes, sliding scale fees, a focus on practical skills rather than competition. "There's a community center in the West End that's been looking for instructors," Mrs. Chen mentioned during one of their regular tea sessions. "My friend volunteers there. They serve mostly working families, immigrants, single parents, people who could benefit from what you know." Ethan visited the center the following week, a converted warehouse that now housed after-school programs, ESL classes, food assistance, and various other services for a neighborhood that had more need than resources. The director, a woman named Aisha, who moved with the efficient weariness of someone perpetually fighting uphill battles, showed him the space they'd allocated for fitness classes. "It's not much," she admitted, gesturing to a room with thin mats and walls that needed paint. "We can't pay you much either, maybe $20 an hour for whatever classes you want to teach. But we have people who've been asking for self-defense instruction, especially women and girls. If you're interested." $20 an hour was nothing compared to what Ethan could charge at a commercial gym. But looking around this space, Imagining it filled with people who genuinely needed these skills, who couldn't afford private lessons or fancy training facilities, felt more right than anything had felt in years. "I'm interested," he said. "When can I start?" The first class was scheduled for a Saturday morning, advertised through the center's networks and local community boards. Ethan arrived early, unsure what to expect, and found 12 women already waiting, ages ranging from late teens to 60s, backgrounds as diverse as the city itself, all sharing a common thread of wanting to feel safer in a world that often felt hostile. "Good morning," Ethan began, suddenly nervous in a way he hadn't been since his first training session as a teenager. "My name is Ethan Brooks. I've been studying martial arts for 15 years, and I'm here to teach you some basic self-defense techniques. But before we start with physical skills, I want to talk about the most important thing, awareness." He walked them through the fundamentals Master Kim had drilled into him. Situational awareness, recognizing danger before it became immediate, understanding that the best fight was the one you never had. Then they moved to physical techniques, starting with simple wrist releases and progressing to more complex escapes. One woman, probably in her 50s with graying hair and strong hands, practiced with particular intensity. During a water break, she approached Ethan. "I saw your video," she said quietly. "The one from the restaurant. That's why I came today." Ethan felt the familiar discomfort of recognition, the weight of being known for the worst moment of his life. "I appreciate you being here, but that video showed me what control looks like," she interrupted. "My ex-husband used to hit me. For 10 years he hit me, and I never fought back because I thought fighting back would make it worse. Then I saw you, someone who clearly knew how to fight, choosing not to. Choosing to protect yourself without hurting someone else even when they deserved it. That's what I want to learn, not how to hurt people. How to protect myself without becoming like the people who hurt me." The words hit Ethan with unexpected force, offering a perspective on that night he'd never considered. He'd been so focused on his own experience, his own trauma, that he hadn't fully registered how his response might resonate with others who'd faced violence and felt powerless. "That's exactly what we're going to learn," he said. "Control. Boundaries. How to say no with your body when words aren't enough." The class became a regular fixture in Ethan's week, then expanded to 2 classes, then 3, as word spread through the community. He taught teenagers how to escape grabs, taught mothers how to create distance, taught elderly women that they had the right to defend their space regardless of what society suggested about deference and propriety. And in teaching them, Ethan found himself learning that strength wasn't just physical, that courage came in forms he'd never considered, that the people who showed up week after week to practice techniques they hoped never to use were often braver than anyone who'd ever stepped into a ring. Money remained tight despite the settlement. Ethan had been conservative with his spending, putting most of it away for Lily's future and their long-term security rather than indulging in anything extravagant. The community center income barely covered their basic expenses, but he supplemented it with private lessons for students who wanted more intensive training, and gradually they built something sustainable. Lily flourished in ways Ethan hadn't anticipated. With financial pressure reduced, he had more time for her, more energy to invest in homework help and school projects, and just being present. She joined the school's science club, developed an intense interest in astronomy, started talking about becoming an astrophysicist with the casual confidence of someone who'd never been told to limit her dreams. "Ms. Patterson says I'm the best student in my grade at math," Lily reported one evening, barely looking up from her homework. "She wants me to take the advanced placement test. That's amazing, Bug. You've been working hard. You help me. You explain things in ways that make sense." She chewed her pencil thoughtfully. "Tommy's dad still yells at their dog. Still not beating him up." "I know, just keeping you updated." These small moments of normalcy, of childhood proceeding as it should, felt more valuable than any settlement money. This was what Ethan had been fighting for all along, even when he didn't fully realize it. Not just survival, but the space for both of them to become whoever they were meant to be. 6 months after the settlement, Patricia called with unexpected news. "I thought you should know. Madeline Cross was arrested last night." Ethan's stomach dropped. For what? Assault. She got into an altercation with a parking attendant, shoved him into a wall when he told her she couldn't park in a handicapped space. The attendant pressed charges. Given her documented history and the terms of our settlement requiring anger management, the prosecutor is taking it seriously. Is she going to jail? Probably not. First offense technically, since our settlement wasn't a criminal conviction, but she'll likely get probation, mandatory counseling, community service. The judge apparently read about our case and is not inclined to be lenient. Patricia paused. I wanted you to know because it validates everything you said, that this was about pattern, about someone who needed real consequences to change. You might have saved that parking attendant from worse by forcing accountability on her. After hanging up, Ethan sat with this information, trying to sort through complicated feelings. He didn't feel satisfaction at Madeline's arrest, didn't experience the vindication he might have expected. Instead, he felt mostly sadness. For her, for the parking attendant, for every person caught in the blast radius of her unexamined anger. But he also felt validation for the choice he'd made to fight back, to insist on accountability even when accepting payment for silence would have been easier. It hadn't just been about his own dignity. It had been about preventing future harm, about insisting that wealth couldn't purchase immunity from consequences. The anniversary of the incident arrived with little fanfare. 1 year since Madeline had walked into Lumiere, since Ethan's life had exploded and reassembled into something different. He marked the day by taking Lily to the park, the same park he'd promised to take her during those desperate early days when everything felt uncertain. They bought ice cream from a vendor, sat on a bench watching other children play, and talked about nothing in particular: school, friends, whether they should get a cat now that their apartment allowed pets with a deposit Ethan could actually afford. "Daddy," Lily said suddenly, ice cream melting down her cone in the late afternoon sun, "are you happy now?" The question caught him off guard, forcing him to actually assess rather than deflect. Was he happy? Not in the uncomplicated way he'd been happy before Claire died, before single parenthood, before responsibility became his defining characteristic, but something better than happy, maybe. Something more durable. "Yeah, Bug, I think I am. Not because everything's perfect, but because I feel like myself again." Does that make sense? Kind of. You seem taller. Still the same height. Not physically taller, just bigger somehow, like you take up more space. Out of the mouths of children. She was right. He did take up more space now, moved through the world differently, no longer apologizing for existing or making himself smaller to accommodate others' comfort. The man who'd worked at Lumiere, who'd absorbed insults as part of the job description, felt like someone Ethan used to know rather than who he currently was. "You made me braver," Lily continued, working on her ice cream with focused attention. "When I saw what happened in that video, everyone at school saw it, you know. I thought maybe you'd be upset that everyone knew. But you weren't. You just kept being you, kept fighting even when people said you should give up. So now when things are hard at school, I think about that, about how you didn't give up." Ethan's throat tightened with emotion he hadn't expected. He'd spent so much time worrying about how the incident would damage Lily, how the public nature of it would harm her, that he'd never considered it might teach her something valuable about resilience and self-respect. "I'm proud of you," he managed. "So proud." "I'm proud of you too, Daddy." They finished their ice cream in companionable silence, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, and Ethan felt something settle in his chest. Not closure exactly, but acceptance. The past year had been brutal, transformative, and ultimately necessary. He wouldn't choose to repeat it, but he also couldn't regret the person it had made him become. The community center classes continued to grow. By the 1-year mark, Ethan was teaching 6 classes a week to over 50 regular students, with a waiting list for people wanting to join. The center's director approached him about developing a youth program, teaching self-defense and discipline to at-risk teenagers who needed structure and confidence. "We could pay you more," Aisha offered. "Not a lot more, but enough to make this a full-time position if you're interested. You'd be developing curriculum, training other instructors, building something sustainable." It was exactly the kind of opportunity Ethan had been hoping for. Work that mattered, that used his skills meaningfully, that paid enough to support his family without requiring him to compromise his values. He accepted immediately, and within 3 months he was working full-time at the center, building programs and training instructors and watching young people discover their own strength. One of his teenage students, a 16-year-old named Marcus, who'd initially come to classes angry and defensive, stayed after one evening to talk. "My mom wanted me to thank you," Marcus said, not quite meeting Ethan's eyes. "She says I'm different since I started coming here, calmer or something. You've been putting in the work. That's what makes the difference." "Yeah, but it's more than the physical stuff. You keep talking about control, about how real strength is choosing not to fight when you don't have to. My dad never taught me that. He just taught me that being tough meant never backing down, always escalating. Got me suspended twice before I came here. And now? Now I know that walking away isn't the same as being weak, that protecting yourself doesn't mean you have to hurt someone else." Marcus finally looked up, making eye contact. "You showed us that. In that video everyone's seen, you could have destroyed that lady, but you didn't. That's real power." The conversation stayed with Ethan long after Marcus left, another reminder that the incident at Lumiere had ripples he couldn't fully track. The video that had felt like public humiliation had become, for some people, a teaching tool about restraint and dignity under pressure. He wondered sometimes what had happened to Madeline, whether the arrest had actually changed anything fundamental about her or just made her more careful about where she directed her anger. Patricia mentioned occasionally that Madeline had completed her court-ordered counseling, that she'd stepped back from public life, that her investment firm had quietly pushed her into a less visible role. Redemption, maybe, or just consequences finally catching up. Ethan found he didn't particularly care which. His life had moved forward enough that Madeline Cross occupied very little mental space, becoming just a person who'd once tried to break him and failed. The settlement money continued to provide security, allowing Ethan to make choices based on what felt right rather than what paid best. He donated a portion to the community center, another portion to an organization that provided legal aid to service workers facing workplace abuse. The rest stayed invested for Lily's future and their rainy day fund, a cushion against disaster that let him breathe easier. Mrs. Chen remained a constant presence, her apartment a second home where Lily did homework and learned to cook and absorbed wisdom from someone who'd lived long enough to understand that most crises eventually pass. She'd been right that first morning after the incident, when she'd suggested invisibility was costing Ethan more than he realized. "You're different," she observed one evening over tea, nearly 2 years after everything had happened. "Lighter somehow." "I'm about the same weight," Ethan joked. "Not physically, emotionally. You used to carry everything so tight, like you were afraid if you relaxed for a second everything would fall apart. Now you laugh more. Let things go more. Trust that the world won't destroy you." The world tried pretty hard, though. And you're still here. That's the lesson. Not that bad things won't happen, but that you're strong enough to survive them and stay yourself. Mrs. Chen refilled his cup with the precision of long practice. "Lily's lucky to have you. I'm lucky to have her, and you, this whole makeshift family we've built." Nothing makeshift about it. Family is who shows up, who stays, who tells you the truth even when it's uncomfortable. She smiled slightly. "Who makes you dumplings when you're having a crisis?" Fair point. The conversation drifted to other topics. Mrs. Chen's grandchildren visiting for the holidays, Lily's latest school project, the new restaurant opening down the block. Normal things, ordinary concerns, the beautiful mundanity of a life that had finally settled into sustainable rhythms. Master Kim reached out around this time, asking if Ethan would consider teaching advanced classes at his gym for students who wanted to progress beyond basics. "I'm getting old," he admitted over the phone. "My knees aren't what they were. But more than that, I see how you teach now, with more wisdom than I could give you back then. You've lived through things, survived things, and that shows in how you approach training." "I learned from the best," Ethan said. "You learned, then you added your own understanding. That's how it should work." "So what do you say? 2 evenings a week, teaching people who are serious about the discipline?" Ethan agreed and found himself back in a proper training gym for the first time in years, teaching advanced techniques to students who wanted to compete or just push their limits. It felt like completing a circle, returning to where he'd started but bringing everything he'd learned in the years between. One evening, working with a student on defensive combinations, Ethan caught his reflection in the gym's wall mirror and barely recognized himself. Not because he looked different physically, but because the person looking back carried himself with quiet confidence, moved through space like someone who knew exactly who he was and felt no need to apologize for it. The man who'd worked at Lumiere, who'd made himself small and swallowed insults, was gone completely. In his place was someone who'd been broken and reassembled, who'd learned that dignity wasn't something others could take from you, only something you could surrender, and even then, not permanently. Lily turned 9, then 10, growing from a child into something approaching a young person with her own opinions and interests and increasingly complicated inner life. She excelled in school, joined the debate team, started teaching younger kids at the community center the basic self-defense techniques her father had taught her. "I want to be like you when I grow up," she announced one evening out of nowhere. "What do you mean?" "Someone who helps people be strong. Not just physically, but like mentally strong. Knowing who you are strong." She was sprawled on the couch doing homework, hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. "All my friends' parents work jobs they hate because they have to. You work a job you love because you chose to. That's what I want." "Sometimes choosing what you love means other stuff gets harder," Ethan cautioned, not wanting to oversimplify the reality of following your values in a world that often punished them. "I know, but you did it. You chose right even when it was expensive and scary. That matters more than being comfortable." At 10 years old, she understood things that had taken Ethan 3 decades to learn. Maybe that was the real victory of everything that had happened. Not the settlement, or the vindication, or even the career change, but raising a child who understood that integrity had value beyond its market price. The viral video eventually faded from public consciousness, replaced by newer controversies and fresher content. Occasionally someone would recognize Ethan from it, in the grocery store, at Lily's school events, on the street, but the recognition became less frequent as time passed. He was no longer the guy from that video in most contexts, just a self-defense instructor and single father navigating life like everyone else. Madeline Cross disappeared from his life entirely, becoming just a name he occasionally heard in business news or legal filings related to her company. Whether she'd genuinely changed or just gotten better at hiding her behavior, Ethan didn't know and didn't need to. His partner's story was finished. 3 years after the incident, the community center held a fundraising gala to support expanded programs. Ethan attended reluctantly, uncomfortable with the formal setting and required small talk, but Aisha had insisted he needed to be there since much of the funding was tied to the self-defense program's success. During the cocktail hour, a woman approached him, early 40s, professional bearing, vaguely familiar though he couldn't place her face. "Mr. Brooks, I'm Jennifer Walsh. We spoke on the phone once, years ago. I'm a reporter with Metro Daily." Ethan remembered. She'd called during those first chaotic days after the video went viral, offering him a chance to tell his story. He'd declined then, too overwhelmed to trust anyone with his narrative. "I remember. What can I do for you?" "Actually, I wanted to thank you. After your case, I did a series of articles about abuse of service workers, using your story as a jumping-off point. It won a journalism award and helped push through some local legislation protecting workers from customer assault." She smiled slightly. "You probably didn't know this, but what happened to you changed things for a lot of people." Ethan hadn't known. He'd been so focused on his own recovery, his own rebuilding, that he hadn't tracked the broader implications of his decision to fight back. "I'm glad something good came from it," he said carefully. "More than something. Restaurant workers now have stronger legal protections. Training programs have been implemented about de-escalation and customer management. You created a conversation that needed to happen." Jennifer paused. "Would you ever consider talking about it publicly? Not for sensation, but for the educational value?" "Maybe someday. Right now I'm just focused on the work here, teaching people to protect themselves. That feels more useful than talking about the past." "Fair enough. But if you change your mind, I'd love to tell your story properly. Not the viral moment, but what came after. How you rebuilt, what you learned, the impact you're having now." They exchanged contact information, though Ethan doubted he'd ever use it. His story felt too personal, too raw, to become content for consumption. But he appreciated knowing that something positive had emerged from that nightmare, that his refusal to accept abuse as inevitable had contributed to broader change. The gala continued around them, donors and volunteers and community members mixing together in service of shared purpose. Lily was there somewhere with Mrs. Chen, probably charming everyone with her articulate explanations of orbital mechanics. Patricia had come too, bringing her wife, staying long enough to congratulate Ethan on building something meaningful before excusing herself to other engagements. Looking around the room, Ethan felt the kind of satisfaction that came from knowing you'd invested in something larger than yourself. This center, these programs, these people learning to value their own safety and dignity, this was real impact, measurable in ways that court victories and settlement checks never could be. Near the end of the evening, Aisha pulled him aside. "I have some news. We've secured funding to expand significantly. 3 new locations across the city, each needing a self-defense program. I'd like you to oversee all of them, training instructors, developing standardized curriculum, basically building a model that can scale." That's a huge responsibility. It is. But you've proven you can handle it. And more importantly, you understand what we're actually doing here. Not just teaching techniques, but rebuilding people's sense of agency and worth. That's not something you can just hire for. It has to come from someone who's lived it. The offer came with increased salary, benefits, the kind of stability Ethan had once thought impossible while doing work he actually believed in. He accepted without hesitation, shaking Aisha's hand and already mentally planning how to structure the expanded programs. Walking home that night with Lily half asleep on his shoulder and Mrs. Chen chatting about the evening, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in years: contentment. Not the absence of problems or challenges, but a fundamental satisfaction with the direction of his life, the person he was becoming, the future he was building. "Daddy?" Lily mumbled against his shoulder, 3/4 asleep. "Today was good." "Yeah, Bug. Today was good." And it was. Not perfect, not without complications, but genuinely good in ways that mattered. The kind of good that came from hard-won wisdom, from surviving storms and learning to navigate by stars instead of streetlights. 4 years after Madeline Cross had walked into Lumiere and changed his life forever, Ethan stood in front of a room full of new instructors at the first expanded community center location. They were diverse in age, background, and experience, but unified in wanting to use martial arts as a tool for empowerment rather than violence. "Before we talk about curriculum or techniques," Ethan began, "I want to tell you why this work matters. Most of you know my story. It's been public enough. What you might not know is what I learned from it." He paused, organizing thoughts he'd carried for years, but never quite articulated this directly. "I learned that strength isn't about how much damage you can do. It's about how much you can endure without losing yourself. I learned that fighting back doesn't always mean physical confrontation. Sometimes it means refusing to accept someone else's assessment of your worth. And I learned that the most important battle is often the one to remain human, remain compassionate, even when you'd be justified in becoming something else." The instructors listened with the intensity of people who'd chosen this work because they understood it mattered, because they'd seen or experienced the kind of powerlessness that these programs addressed. "We're not teaching people to be fighters. We're teaching them to be themselves, fully and without apology. To take up space, set boundaries, trust their instincts. The physical techniques are just tools for that larger purpose. Never forget that." Training the instructors became Ethan's primary focus over the following months, building a team that understood the philosophy as well as the techniques. He brought in guest speakers, survivors of violence, psychologists specializing in trauma, legal experts on self-defense law. The program became comprehensive, addressing not just the physical aspects of safety, but the emotional and psychological dimensions. Master Kim came to observe one of the training sessions, watching with the critical eye of someone who'd spent 50 years in martial arts. Afterward, he pulled Ethan aside. "You've become a better teacher than I ever was," he said simply. "Master Kim, it's true. I taught technique, discipline, tradition, important things, yes. But you teach something deeper, how to stay whole when the world tries to break you. That's wisdom I never had to give." The compliment meant more than any settlement money, any legal victory, any external validation. This man who'd shaped so much of who Ethan was recognized that his student had evolved beyond mimicry into something original and valuable. "I learned from your foundation," Ethan said. "Everything I teach is built on what you gave me." "As it should be, but You added floors I never imagined. That's the way of things. Each generation takes what came before and builds higher. Master Kim smiled, the expression crinkling his weathered face. I'm proud of you. Not for fighting back, not for winning, for choosing to use what happened as fuel for helping others. The programs continued to expand, reaching more people, changing more lives in small but significant ways. Ethan heard stories regularly now. A woman who'd escaped an abusive relationship feeling strong enough to testify in court. A teenager who'd avoided a robbery by projecting confidence learned in class. A single mother who'd set boundaries with a harassing neighbor. Not every story had a happy ending. Some students stopped coming after a few sessions, unable to face the emotional work that came with physical training. Others made progress, then backslid when life got overwhelming. But enough people found genuine help, genuine transformation, that the work felt meaningful even on difficult days. Lily was 12 when she asked to take her first formal martial arts class. Not just the basics her father had taught, but real training at Master Kim's gym. Ethan watched her first session with the same anxiety any parent feels seeing their child step into something challenging, wanting to protect her while knowing protection meant letting her struggle. She was good, coordinated, focused, absorbing instruction with the same intensity she brought to school and science projects. But more than good, she was herself, approaching martial arts as another tool for understanding the world rather than as identity or performance. How was it? Ethan asked afterward as they walked to the car. Hard. My legs hurt. But good hard, you know? Like I accomplished something. She was sweaty and grinning, more animated than he'd seen her in months. Master Kim says I have good instincts. You do, but remember this is a marathon, not a sprint. Building real skill takes years. I know. That's okay. I'm not in a hurry. The patience she demonstrated, the willingness to commit to long-term growth, came from watching her father rebuild slowly and sustainably over years. She'd learned that rushing led to fragile foundations, that real change required time and consistency, and accepting that some days you'd move backward before moving forward again. 5 years after the incident, Lumiere closed its doors, a victim of changing tastes and economic pressures that had nothing to do with Ethan's story. He read about it in a local business journal, feeling neither satisfaction nor sadness, just a vague recognition that the place where his old life ended was itself ending. Mr. Castellano reached out afterward, his email brief and professional. I've thought often over the years about how we handled your situation. I told myself we made the right business decision, but business decisions have human costs. I'm sorry we didn't stand behind you the way we should have. Your dignity deserved better than we gave it. Ethan replied with equal brevity, Thank you for saying that. It matters. And it did. Not because he'd been waiting for an apology, but because acknowledgement, even late acknowledgement, had value. The 6th anniversary passed without fanfare, marked only by Ethan taking a personal day to sit in the park with Lily, now 13 and full of teenage certainty about everything. They didn't talk about the incident or its anniversary. They just existed together, father and daughter, eating overpriced food truck tacos and watching the city move around them. Do you ever wish it hadn't happened? Lily asked suddenly. The thing at the restaurant? Yeah, sometimes. It was brutal to live through. But if it hadn't happened, you'd still be working there, still pretending to be small, still unhappy even if you didn't admit it. She was watching him with those sharp eyes that saw too much. So maybe it was awful, but also necessary? That's a very mature way of thinking about trauma. I've had a good teacher. They sat in silence for a while after that, and Ethan realized his daughter had become someone he genuinely liked, not just loved. She was thoughtful, principled, willing to sit with complexity rather than demanding simple answers. Whatever mistakes he'd made as a parent, and there had been many, he'd apparently gotten enough right that she was turning into a remarkable human. I'm proud of you, he said. I know, you tell me constantly. Because it's true constantly. She rolled her eyes but smiled, that teenage dismissal that couldn't quite hide pleasure at the praise. They finished their tacos and walked home through streets Ethan had once navigated with exhausted desperation, now traveled with something approaching peace. The community center programs continued to thrive and expand, eventually partnering with schools and social service agencies to reach at-risk populations. Ethan found himself consulting on policy, training law enforcement on de-escalation, speaking at conferences about empowerment-based self-defense. None of it made him wealthy. He lived comfortably but modestly, most of the settlement money carefully invested for Lily's future. But wealth had never been the goal. Security? Yes. The ability to choose meaningful work over profitable work. The freedom to say no to situations that required him to compromise his values. These things he had, and they were enough. Master Kim died when Ethan was 38, peacefully in his sleep after a life fully lived. The funeral was packed with former students, people whose lives he'd shaped through decades of patient instruction. Ethan spoke at the service, talking about what Master Kim had given him, not just fighting skills, but a framework for living with discipline and purpose. He taught me that the way you train is the way you live, Ethan said to the assembled mourners. That cutting corners in the gym means cutting corners in life. That real strength is consistent, sustainable, built through daily commitment to being slightly better than yesterday. Everything good in my life traces back to those lessons. After the service, elderly students swapped stories about Master Kim's strict standards, his terrible jokes, his unwavering belief that anyone could improve if they were willing to work. The community that had formed around his teaching remained strong even as they grieved his absence. Lily was 16 when she earned her first belt at Master Kim's gym, now run by one of his senior students. Ethan watched her test with the same anxiety he'd felt years ago, seeing her face challenges he couldn't solve for her, knowing she had to find her own strength. She passed, exhausted and triumphant, and Ethan felt something in his chest that might have been pride but was bigger than pride. This young woman he'd raised alone through impossible circumstances was becoming exactly who she was meant to be. Confident, capable, kind, despite having every reason to be hard. Master Kim would have liked to see this, Lily said afterward, sweaty and grinning. He knew you'd get here. He told me years ago you had warrior spirit. Is that a compliment? From him? The highest. They went for celebratory pizza, a tradition they'd maintained through belt tests and school achievements and all the small victories that made up a life. Sitting across from his daughter, nearly grown now, preparing for college applications and adult responsibilities, Ethan felt the particular bittersweetness of parenthood, pride in who they're becoming mixed with grief for the child they no longer are. "What are you thinking?" Lily asked, catching his expression. "That you're turning out better than I could have hoped. That I'm proud of you. That time moves faster than anyone warned you about. Don't go getting all sentimental on me. I'm still your annoying kid. You're my annoying young adult. There's a difference." She threw a wadded napkin at him, laughing, and the moment passed into the collection of ordinary, extraordinary memories that made up their shared life. Ethan was 40 when he realized he'd stopped thinking about Madeline Cross entirely, stopped checking news about her, or wondering what had happened after their settlement. She'd become truly irrelevant, just a person who'd briefly intersected his life and taught him important lessons about dignity and self-worth. The realization came during a training session, watching a new student practice defensive stances with fierce concentration. This woman had come to class carrying trauma from workplace harassment, needing to rebuild confidence that had been systematically destroyed by someone in power. She'd made remarkable progress over 6 months, standing taller, speaking louder, taking up space with less apology. And watching her growth, Ethan understood that this was his revenge, if revenge was even the right word. Not hurting Madeline or punishing her or even changing her, but preventing future Madelines from successfully destroying people. Every person who left his programs feeling stronger, more certain of their worth, was a small victory against the forces that tried to crush them. Every teenager who learned to set boundaries, every woman who learned to trust her instincts, every man who learned that strength included restraint. These were the ripples extending from that night at Lumiere. Madeline had tried to make him small. Instead, she'd created someone who spent his life helping others refuse to be small. If that wasn't justice, it was at least meaning. Lily graduated high school with honors, full scholarship to a university with a strong astrophysics program, ready to chase the dream she'd been building since childhood. The night before she left for college, she and Ethan sat on their apartment balcony watching the city lights, both avoiding the conversation about how much was about to change. "Are you going to be okay?" Lily finally asked. "Living alone after all these years?" I'll be fine. The real question is whether you'll be okay. College is intense. I'm ready. You made sure I was ready. She leaned against his shoulder, a gesture from childhood that she'd mostly outgrown, but returned to in moments of vulnerability. Thank you for everything, for fighting for us, for showing me what strength actually looks like. Thank you for giving me a reason to fight, for being my purpose when I couldn't find one myself. They sat in comfortable silence, father and daughter, aware this was an ending and a beginning, both. Tomorrow, she'd leave for university. Next week, Ethan would rearrange the apartment to convert her room into a home office. They'd call regularly, visit occasionally, navigate the strange new dynamic of parenting an adult child. But tonight they were still this, still the unit they'd formed in tragedy and hardened through survival, still themselves. I love you, Bug, Ethan said quietly. Love you too, Daddy. Morning came regardless of whether they were ready. Ethan drove Lily to campus, helped her move into her dorm room, met her roommate and her roommate's parents who seemed nice enough. He made sure she knew how to work the meal plan, where campus security was located, all the practical things parents worry about when launching their children into independence. And then he hugged her goodbye, longer than she probably wanted, not quite long enough for him, and drove home to an apartment that felt suddenly, profoundly empty. Mrs. Chen was waiting in the hallway when he returned, holding a casserole in sympathy. First day's the worst, she announced. Tomorrow gets easier. Day after that gets easier still. Come on, let's eat dinner, and you can tell me you're fine when we both know you're not. They ate together, drinking tea and talking about nothing and everything, and gradually the apartment felt less empty, reminding Ethan that family wasn't just biological connection, but chosen presence, Mrs. Chen had been family for years, showing up consistently, caring without condition. What now? She asked as they cleaned up the dishes. Now I keep working, keep teaching, keep building something that matters. Lily's taken care of. Scholarship plus the money I saved means she won't graduate with debt. I'm stable, healthy, doing work I love. Ethan dried the last plate and set it carefully in the cabinet. I think I'm actually happy, Mrs. Chen. After everything, I ended up happy. You earned it. Not many people fight as hard as you fought and stay themselves. You should be proud. I am. Not for the fighting, but for what came after, for choosing to use pain as fuel instead of letting it consume me. They said goodnight, and Ethan was alone in his quiet apartment, truly alone for the first time in 13 years. He'd been a father for so long that being just Ethan felt strange, unfamiliar, simultaneously liberating and terrifying. But as he sat with that strangeness, letting it settle, he realized he knew who Ethan was now. Not Ethan the waiter, not Ethan the fighter, not even Ethan the father, primarily. Just Ethan, a man who'd survived trauma, rebuilt with intention, and created something meaningful from the wreckage. He pulled out his phone and texted Lily. Proud of you, love you. Don't forget to call your old man occasionally. Her response came immediately. I'm literally across town, not on Mars. Love you too. Smiling, Ethan stood and looked around his home, smaller than it needed to be with just him, but comfortable, filled with memories and books and evidence of a life well lived. Tomorrow, he'd start adjusting to this new phase. Tonight, he'd simply be grateful for having survived long enough to reach it. The window showed the city sparkling in evening darkness, millions of lives unfolding in parallel, each with their own struggles and victories and complicated journeys from who they were to who they were becoming. Somewhere out there, Madeline Cross was living whatever life she'd built from the consequences of her actions. Somewhere, former restaurant workers were standing up for themselves because they'd seen it was possible. Somewhere, people Ethan had taught were walking through the world a little taller, a little more certain of their worth. And here, in this small apartment that had housed so much growth and pain and love, Ethan Brooks stood at his window and felt something he'd spent years earning, peace. Not the absence of struggle, but the presence of meaning. Not the end of the story, but the beginning of its next chapter. Not perfection, but something better. Authenticity, hard-won and carefully maintained. The quiet man in the loud room had found his voice. The fighter had learned when not to fight. The father had raised a remarkable daughter, and in the process, become remarkable himself. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything.